Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lorebeards and Roleplaying. Today, it's just me for at least a little bit. Vera will be joining us. She's got some things she had to take care of, and she will be a little bit late, which is, I think, ironic and also very topical for today's topic, which is about pacing in role-playing games. So that's gonna be a thing we do. Hello, everybody. I am Ross Watson. I am a game designer and author. I've written over 100 different role-playing game products. Some of my highlights are Star Wars: Edge of the Empire, Torg Eternity, Savage Worlds Rifts, most of the Warhammer 40k role-playing game lines, and many, many, many more. So that's what I bring to the table. And today we're going to talk about pacing because I think pacing is probably the best skill that I have learned as game master over the years. It is, in my opinion, extremely important, and I'm not the only one. Some people you may have heard of, like Monty Cook and Shanna Germain, they both say that the key to becoming a great GM, more than anything else, is an understanding of pacing. So pacing might seem like on the surface, if you're just like out there and you're thinking like, what's pacing in a role-playing game? Well, it might seem like, okay, it's just how fast things happen, but it's not. It's not, I should say, it's not just that. Pacing can be a lot of things, but I think more than anything else, it's the rhythm of the story. It's the deliberate uh change between fast scenes and slow scenes. And we'll talk about fast scenes and slow scenes today and what makes one or the other a thing. Um, but to keep your players engaged and interested in what's going on over the course of a whole session, which can be anywhere from a couple hours to 8 hours or longer, depending on where you guys are and what you're playing. To keep someone engaged over that amount of time is not easy, and pacing is probably one of the strongest tools in your toolbox to do that. So again, it's probably the most important thing to say here is that pacing is not just speed. It's not just racing through one scene to get to the next scene. That's not how pacing works. In fact, I would say there's kind of a thing when you talk about here, the split between pacing and flow. Those are two different things. Pacing is the narrative rhythm of the story. It's the speed at which individual scenes are, they move or they are processed by the players. It's this is kind of a core element of adventure design, is the pace. Like where we have a nice slow scene where we can do a lot of role playing investigation. Where do we have a nice fast scene, which is a fun uh, combat scene or skirmish. And this isn't to say that it can't be, like, you can have a fast scene that is investigation or is role playing, and you can have a slow scene that is combat. But typically, they tend to fall into those categories. So then there's flow, right? The separation between pacing and flow. Flow is the moment to moment management of the table. This is the energy of the table, keeping the dice rolling, decisions coming, and attention focus. This is about running the session rather than designing the adventure. Some people like to call this table control, and there's elements of table control that do apply to this. We should probably do a whole episode on table control, because I've met some game masters who are excellent at table control, and I have been at tables where it's not very good, and there's an issue there. But yeah, we've kind of defined what pacing is, and we've kind of defined what flow is, and how those are different. So why why should you care about pacing? If you let's just say you're doing a dungeon crawl, right? You're just kicking in the door, you're killing some orcs, you're taking some gold, and there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy that style of play too. There's nothing wrong with it. But let's say that's what you're planning for your next session. Okay, you may be thinking to yourself, well, I don't need to worry about that much about pacing, because it's just exploration, it's just combat. Well, you can try and design a fast scene. You can certainly say, okay, I intend for this to be fast, high tension, But what can happen at the table is it can get bogged down. It can get bogged down by looking up rules or players who are distracted. And if you have that issue, that I mean, those are both flow issues, okay, rather than pacing issues. But if you have those issues, it's not going to be a fast scene. It's going to be much longer and drawn out, and that's going to require, as a game master, you to shift some gears in your head. Um, One of the things that's interesting about being a game master is a lot of improv does fall on your shoulders, and some of this is like where you shuffle around the focus of the pace or the flow of your game. And I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you right now, so I'm going to take a quick moment to just look at some of the comments here. Hey, we've got one from Juppe Rantalainen, a good friend of ours and guest of the show when we talked about Nordic LARP. Thank you, Juppe. He says, I must say that Ross's scenario, the Garnet Town Gambit, is the best example of well-executed pacing in role-playing games. Thank you, Juppe. Garnet Town Gambit is an adventure I wrote for Savage Worlds Rifts, and I wrote it because I intended it to be an intro session that you would run over about 4 hours. So having a goal in mind of like how long you want the adventure or session, I should say, how long you want the session to be, that's really helpful to know, because if you know ahead of time, okay, this is going to be about 4 hours or it's going to be about 6 hours, you can start to kind of pre-plan ahead and say, okay, I know I have a big fight scene. And one thing you definitely do not want to do for pacing is you do not want to start a giant fight scene with 1 hour left. That's a bad idea. You will not enjoy how that works out. So yeah, the first thing I would say is just kind of have an idea, understand how long your session's going to be. I got a question from the Exiled one. It says, what's your ideal session length? Interesting question. This definitely falls down into personal preference more than anything else. I am a guy, I grew up through the 80s and 90s. I did a lot of role playing in college in the 90s. And I got used to big, long sessions. Like I enjoy kind of taking my time a little bit. I enjoy sitting around with my friends and just kind of spending a day playing role-playing games. So for me, my ideal session is somewhere around 6 to 8 hours. And I realize it's maybe longer than a lot of people want. I designed Garnet Town Gambit for 4 hours because most convention games, if you go to your local gaming convention or you go to Gen Con or you go to Origins, anytime you go to a big gaming convention, they typically organize role-playing games into 4-hour slots. And that just seems to be kind of a consensus, at least in North America, a consensus of how long a session should generally last. I know some people play during the week rather than on the weekends. And a weeknight, it's difficult to get 4 hours. I know a lot of people in my area in Denver, Colorado, they like to play 2 to 3 hours on a weekday as opposed to a weekend. Whereas, I'm running a Star Wars game right now every other Sunday, and we are typically hitting around 4 or 5 hours per session. The reason why we do that is one of my players has a hard out. He has to be on the road back home by a certain time, and that's just the way that goes. And that can change again, like if you have an ongoing campaign, and let's say your campaign is set for 6 hours or 4 hours or whatever, there can be a night where somebody's going to say, hey, I can only show up for X amount of time, or you'll have to end a little bit early for something else that you've got going on in your life, whatever. Those are just some brief descriptions of session lengths. And I hope that those are hopefully answer the question from the Exiled one. Thank you so much. So having that in mind, I think the other thing I would say about pacing, the most important thing to keep in mind, this is you're trying to remove dead air. Okay, you're trying to remove dead space in between meaningful choices. When people show up and they want to sit down and they want to play with the character, they want to do something, they want to have some kind of agency and make an impact and make a choice. And the space in between those choices is really where you can lose people. The energy can fall away, they can get distracted, and they can become unengaged. So what you're trying to do with pacing is you're trying to tighten up all the spaces in between the meaningful choices. And again, just so we're clear, a meaningful choice is where you could pick between two or more options, and the options have some kind of consequence attached to them. I know that seems pretty obvious, but it's worth stating it since we're talking about things at the beginning here. When something in your session feels slow or feels boring, it's almost I would say take a closer look, because most of the time, at least in my experience, if something feels slow or feels boring, it's because there's not enough meaningful choice. Not that things are literally moving too slowly, but instead there's too much space in between the last time you made a meaningful choice and now, or then, or whatever. Right? You understand what I'm talking about. So now we can talk about some things that are important for pacing. The idea of a fast scene or a slow scene. So fast scene is where a lot of things happen in a short period of time. I mean, that's pretty obvious again, but it's worth stating these things to be clear. The individual details matter less than the vibes, the overall emotional feeling, the arc, if you will. That's the most important thing in a fast scene. So a combat scenes can be typically are fast scenes. Chases are a good fast scene. Any kind of high stakes confrontation. If in our Star Wars game we had our gambler had to play against a Black Sun Vigo to gain information, and he was playing a game of sabacc. And the antes and the bets and the wagers that were going on around the game. This is what built the tension. So it was a fast scene, even though it wasn't really about something fast. It was about gambling. Okay. Now, a fast scene you want to evoke excitement. You want to evoke tension. You want to evoke, above all, urgency. A lot of games have really good systems or ideals for putting some sort of time pressure on things, but a lot of that is up to the game master to communicate directly to the players. And so in a fast scene, it's wise for you to remember to emphasize what's at stake and also the urgency. Like, you only have this long until the thing happens. And that can really help move a fast scene along. Now, what's interesting about this, of course, is that as a game master, this can be an utterly false choice. For the game master, it could be like, I don't really care how quickly you do this because I have plenty of scenes, and it's really all about everybody having a good time. But if you're able to communicate that pressure, communicate that urgency, that's going to filter down into the experience that the players are having, the vibes, the immersion. Right, the really good parts of role-playing games are those. And if the players trust you, which let's hope that they do, because trust is one of the most important things between a game master and player. But if the players trust you, they're going to pick up on the cues. They're going to understand that you are selling them a scene that is intended to be quick and intended to have that pressure on it, and they will buy into it if they trust you. Buying into things is something we covered in our session 0 episode. If you want to go check that out, you can hear more about buying in. And Vera has some really awesome stuff that she discusses in that episode. So that would be my suggestion to you. So the other thing about fast scenes, you don't want to spend too much time narrating. You want quick, punchy descriptions. Give the basics. It's a tall guy with 2 pistols. He shows up. He scans the bar, and he sees, a member of your party and narrows his eyes dramatically. Cool. That's all we need to know, right? Short, quick, to the point. Long descriptions can actually hurt a fast scene, partially because, at least in of men of a certain age, long descriptions usually meant there was a trap, or or a lot of flavor text usually indicated there was something not right in the area, and people were kind of got taught to listen for that. Oh, there's a lot of description, so I need to pay attention so I can avoid the trap or avoid getting hurt or solve the puzzle. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why having short narration is good in a fast scene. But the second one is you don't want people to analyze the details too much. And part of this can, again, this can relate to your individual style. I am a game master who likes to put in some really important details. For example, in a superhero game, there's a villain who could mind control people, and when they were mind controlled, their eyes were red rather than whatever their normal color was, but their eyes were red when they were mind controlled. So one thing that could be a concern in a quick, fast scene is if you stop to add unnecessary detail. If you stop to say, well, his eyes are this color, and if you forget, I'm a game master, I do this a lot, so I assume more of the people than I can be forgetful about these things. But if you happen to forget, like there's an important color or an important detail that you sewed in earlier sessions, that people have written this down and taken notes about it, they're like, oh, he's missing his badge. That means XYZ. That's another really good reason to avoid a lot of unnecessary detail in a short scene, because people can get sidetracked. They can start to analyze the details. Is he facing me? Is he facing the door? Just try to wrap up any of those outstanding questions and move to the next thing as quickly as possible in a fast scene. Because fast scenes are also typically shorter scenes. Why are fast scenes shorter scenes? Well, because they demand a lot of cognitive effort. They demand emotional investment. It's you as the game master are selling them something urgent, something important, something that's potentially life-threatening. And people can really only sustain that for so long. So if you're aiming for a fast session, a fast scene. Now your mileage may vary depending on the size of your group. Okay. But if you have around 6 players, I would say aim for no more than 45 minutes on a fast scene. Like we were talking earlier about the 4-hour block, which is what a convention game is typically 4 hours. And that's assuming you have 6 players. If you do a convention game and only 4 people show up, you're probably going to have closer to a 3-hour game, maybe a 2.5-hour game. If you have 3 or less players show up for a 6-player game, at a convention, you're still obligated to run that game. But if it's at your home game, I would recommend you maybe try something, go play a board game or something, because it's not going to be the same kind of experience with only 3 people. But where I was going with this is, at a convention, if you have 3 or less people at your table for a game that usually is supposed to take 4 hours, is probably only going to take 2. Just because 3 people are going to come to consensus a lot faster. 3 people are not going to spend as much time doing individual actions. Everything that you've planned out for a 4-hour game will be truncated considerably by the fewer amount of players. So that's why I'm saying, if you have about 6 players, no more than 45 minutes, and maybe knock 5 or 10 minutes off of that for every player that's less than 6. So if you're doing 4 players, I would knock off maybe 20 minutes and call it a 35-minute session, or a 25-minute session, or a scene. Sorry, scene, not session. Totally different things. So what's the difference now between a fast scene and a slow scene? Well, you probably can guess. It has to do with the narration, first of all. Slow scenes is where you allow your players to process information. This is good. This is a good time to do exposition or investigation or exploration. And it's also a really great time to build your immersion. Okay. Now, the emotional vibe in a fast scene is, of course, as I said, it's very urgent. It's exciting. It should get your heart pounding. In a slow scene, the vibe is going to be more about, well, it's going to be more tied to what your campaign is about, right? Like what you want to evoke emotionally. For me, what I try to do with a long scene is I try to build that immersion more. And so that means I get to really pull out my thesaurus and go crazy, go ham on descriptions. I will talk about the details of the architecture, or I'll talk about the details of an NPC's appearance or their facial expressions, if I can't replicate it, right? So just talk about how they're reacting to the players, making the world feel alive. That's what happens in slow scenes. And you want to try and sandwich your fast scenes in between slow ones. You want that flow from one to the other. The reason for this is because too many downbeats makes the game seem hopeless. Too many upbeats makes the game feel stale. So being able to flow between them helps the game feel fresh, feel like it's moving along, feel like it's moving forward. So if you're going to do a combat scene, you should allow at least a little bit of role play right before you start. And after you finish the role playing, after you finish the combat scene, you should allow for role playing and investigation. If you have a fast scene that's like a car chase, great, do that, awesome. But make sure it's sandwiched in between moments where people can slow down and breathe. And I mean, for me, I like to also offer bio breaks like right after a really big fast scene where everybody got really excited. It's a good time to be like, cool, let's take 5 and come back to the table. It's going to depend on your particular style as to how you approach that, but that's my suggestion to you. So the pacing is not just all one thing or all another. It should be varied. You should try and have a combination of both fast and slow in your session. It's just a lot more helpful that way. And that's what's called the balanced pacing. It's a even mix of slow and fast. It's probably the most versatile method that you can use for pacing. It works best when your sessions can start and end on a high note, which is something I like to do a lot. I always really like to try and start people out with like, cool, you're excited, you're doing something fun with your characters, and I like to end the session with you like, man, you did something amazing, and everybody goes home smiling, right? That's kind of my goal. So balanced works for me because I like to have the high point at the beginning and at the end. If you burn through all your resources early, if your players are like, okay, we're going to use all of our bennies or inspiration or healing potions or whatever in the very first half of your session, that can be kind of an issue, especially if you're trying to build up for some kind of big fight at the end. So one thing to keep in mind is with your balanced approaches, just keep an eye on what the players are doing. It's never a bad thing for a game master to just really try and read the room. Okay, to really try and understand like where the energy level is, where the attention is from your players. Because if they're all in the early part, it's going to be difficult to get them all in at the end unless you really put a lot of energy into your presence as game master. So some of the pacing is going to be directly up to you as a game master, not only in what kind of scene you're offering, but what kind of energy you're putting out there. If the game master is really laid back and calm, nothing wrong with that. But if you want to build up the tension, if you want to build up the energy, if you want to build up the engagement for a fast scene, it can be really important to like stand up, to move your arms around, to get big, as a person and gesture and use your voice in different ways. Game masters have that responsibility to be not just one type of NPC, but like many different types. And narration is part of that. Presentation of the scene is part of that. So as a game master, one of the things you can do to help emphasize that a fast scene should be fast, use that energy yourself. Same thing for a slow scene. If you've been standing up, sit down. If you were really loud, calm your voice, be more moderated. If you're wanting people to relax a little bit, or if you want them to just treat the scene as something that is a slower pace, that can be part of your energy that you give off as a game master. So then there's something called spike pacing. Outside of balance pacing, there's spike pacing. This is where you have one big all or nothing encounter. Often this is something like at the end of a story arc, or if you finally cornered Vecna after 20 sessions and you're like, okay, this last session is all about us fighting Vecna. That's what's called the spike, because you want that investment to be high throughout the whole session. Very challenging, but also very satisfying if done right. So you definitely want your players to be rested and ready. You want the characters to have, consumables and resources like bennies or inspiration. I can't tell you how frustrating it is if you're at a convention game. For example, I can remember one where we played a Savage Worlds game, and it was very frustrating because we were obviously building up towards a major encounter, but we just couldn't get any resources. We couldn't get any bennies. We couldn't get any nothing. So we were basically tapped out when that final fight came around, and it was a bit of a slog. I mean, I'm not going to lie, the dice didn't help, right? I mean, dice can really change the flavor and the flow of an encounter, which I will get into. But in that moment, what the game master should have done is if he was trying to build up for a big spike, is he should have made sure everybody had resources to spend, because that is a cognitive piece of the puzzle in a fast scene. I get to make meaningful choices. Do I or do I not use my resource is a meaningful choice. Again, depends on the game. Some games have resources that spending them is not necessarily that meaningful. Some games where it is more meaningful than ever. I mean, you can argue that inspiration, because it's so rare, is more valuable as a resource than, say, like a Benny would be in Savage Worlds or a Force Point in Star Wars. It just depends. It depends on the game, depends on your group, depends on how they interact with the resources available to them. But it's something to keep in mind. And then lastly, you've got what's called the escalation approach. The escalation approach is really about depleting those resources. It's about making the stakes higher. It's about a tight deadline or a curse that prevents you from resting, or a race across the countryside to stop the vampire before he completes his ritual. So if you are doing an escalating session, if you're like, I want to start off slow, but I want to get faster and faster and faster and faster, that's where you should that's where depleting the resources is actually part of the idea of building that tension and building the danger. Even in the case of an escalation, though, you would want to have a brief break before that big final encounter. You would definitely want to give everybody just a few minutes to gear up, check their character sheets, make sure all their spells are memorized, all that kind of thing. It shouldn't feel the point I'm trying to make here is pacing should never feel random. It should feel like something that you as a game master intentionally choose. Okay. It's something that you want to manage the action of the game. And I really want to point out here, in all three of these approaches, you want to have some sort of aftermath. Having a big fight scene, a big climactic encounter, that's great. Everybody does it. I do it. It's absolutely part of adventure design. That adventure that Yuppie mentioned earlier, Garnet Town Gambit, ends with a big ass fight scene. But it's important. I want to get this across. An aftermath is also really important. It's a moment for everybody to catch their breath and just bring that energy down a little bit. But it's like a cooling off after a hard workout. You know, you want to let everybody just kind of take a breath at the end, and then end the session. Before the end of the session, just give them a few minutes, because what we're all here to do when we're role playing is we want to tell that story. We want to have an arc. We want to start out one place and end up someplace different. And the aftermath gives you that moment to realize it, for each player to realize that their character's story and think about, like, oh, okay, how am I going to take, this going forward with my character? How does this change my character's life? You as the game master, you can use that opportunity not only to help the players tell that story, but also to, if there's an event in the game world that has changed, if the world has shifted, and ideally, the player character should be able to make some sort of impact in the area that they're in. And the aftermath is a good time to just think of it like a little spoonful of ice cream after like doing something cool. Here's your little scoop of ice cream. You eat it. You're like, that's lovely. And now you're cleansed and you're ready to move on to the next thing. But you feel like it's a good way to get some closure and I don't know, reflect. I guess is maybe not the right word, but that's what I like to call it. You reflect on what happened in the session and how that is going to affect your character if you're the player, or the story if you're the game master. Even if it's just one or two sentences, it can be really, really pleasant. And it can be better to have a little slow wind down rather than an abrupt end. I know a lot of Star Wars films, they just smash cut right to the credits. I'm running Star Wars right now, so that is a thing that's been on my mind. Um, but I like to have just a few minutes of reflection or cool down at the very, very end. All right, so here's hoping that we get Vera soon. It's not that I'm not enjoying this, but it's so much more fun with a co-host. And Vera has got a lot of great insight on this, so I really hope she can make it soon. Let's answer a few questions from the chat. Let's see. I would love to do a 6 to 8 hour version of the Carnot Town. You can be done if you have a group that's really into it for sure. Leon Grotsky says my players vote on Wednesdays whether we have a 2 hour stream Friday or a 3 hour campaign Saturday. I would almost always prefer the 3 hour campaign. Part of the reason why I prefer the longer ones is because I think part of any game master's adventure prep needs to be that allocating that setup time for everybody to arrive and get their drinks and talk about what happened to them during the week, or just kind of exchange little notes about their lives. Most of the players in my group are friends, and they see each other once every 2 weeks here at my gaming table. So hey, what have you been up to? Oh, well, I bought a new car, or this or that. So a chunk of your session time is almost always spent on just bullshitting, just gabbing around, just talking about what's going on in your life. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I like longer sessions, because it allows you to get through that in a way that doesn't feel like you're telling everybody to shut up and play, but you also get to play. Exiled One says, my usual sessions are from 5 to 9 after all my players get off work. Awesome. If that works for them, that's great. I can be very, very difficult to do with working adults. So I admire you being able to do that. Yupe says, do you feel like something feels boring, quote unquote? Is it more of a GM problem or a player problem? Depends. What I'm talking about today is how a game master can address that feeling in the room. Another way to think of this is like there's a term called the log jam, and that's usually when the players cannot come up with a plan. They cannot agree to a consensus. They can't really either they don't want to do something, or they just don't feel excited about it. Okay. And a logjam can be very much a player side issue, because you as the game master can present the most straightforward, hey, there's a bridge, and there's a troll guarding the bridge, and the troll demands a toll before he lets you cross the bridge. And the players might just sit there for an hour and debate whether or not they want to fight the troll. It's really about the vibes, though, because I have been in groups where people want to discuss whether or not to fight the troll, and they do it in character, and it's awesome. It can actually be a really interesting moment where you as the game master sit back and just stop talking and let the players role play amongst themselves. Knowing when to do that is a very important game master tool. But if you are the game master and you're doing that thing that I often encourage you to do, if you're trying to read the room and you're like, man, people just seem like they're on their phones, or they're not paying any attention, and they're just sort of half-heartedly discussing the troll issue, that is a logjam. And that is where a game master is going to be the one. Most of the time, the game master is going to be the one to be able to take action, to have that agency to say, okay, I'm going to push the button and something's going to happen. Players don't typically have that option. They can, there can be leaders, there can be people in your party who can say, okay, everybody, we need to figure this out. Are we doing it, yes or no? And if you have a player like that, you should definitely reward them. So sometimes players are the problem, sometimes they're the solution. What we're discussing today is what you can do as a game master, because you have the most ability to affect that progression. And I've got a super chat here from Skylar Martin. Russ, with Vera missing as the DM, it's time to role play her character for the stream. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh my God, that's funny. Yeah, I can imagine I can imagine Vera showing up in the middle of me pretending to be Vera, and that would be a very awkward thing. Interesting idea, though. I like it. I do like it. That's funny. All right, and we've got just a couple more comments I want to read here. Sometimes it's a mismatch, Stefan Rowe says, between DM expectations and player expectations. That can happen. Absolutely. That's true. Sometimes something the DM thinks is boring could be pretty different than what a PC thinks is boring. The exiled one says. Agreed. And again, I'm going to take this all the way back to read the room, right? If you're not sure, it's never a bad time to communicate with players. And I'm that guy. Like I'll stop for a bio break and say, "Is everybody having fun?" I'll literally just ask that sometimes. And if this is also going to depend on how well you know your group. If you're running for a bunch of strangers at a convention, you're going to have a harder time reading the room, especially with all the distractions that come with role playing in a public space. But if it's a group that you have played with before and they're in your home or you're in somebody else's home where the distractions are much less, you're going to be able to have a bit of time to evaluate. Just how are people feeling right now? I don't know what to tell you. Calibrating to the player character's energy is a skill that game masters need to learn, and it's an unfortunate social fact that some people are just not good at this. I was not good at it for a long time until I just paid more attention to it and tried to work on it. So can't happen. Oh, that's a bot. That's not an actual person. Golden Chaos says, question, thoughts on roll to return mechanics with dungeon crawls? Aim is to ensure players get back to base at the end of sessions. Oh, okay. Depends on the dungeon, I'm gonna say. There are dungeons like Undermountain, like the Keep on the Borderlands, like the Tomb of Annihilation. Sorry, Tomb of Horrors, right? There are certain dungeons that being in that dungeon is part of the overall experience. Getting back home is not. Getting back home is just kind of like, if you get a chance to leave when you're done, that's great. And I think a lot of older gamers fall into that category. I think a lot of older gamers are just not used to the idea of going back to a base before you go back to the dungeon, or being able to transition between those two with regularity. Now, I know that it's becoming more popular and certainly has been shown in quite a few fantasy anime, for example, that returning to base or returning to a hub is something that you can do while out dungeoneering, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. If it's built into the world, that it doesn't bother me a bit. Like I said, I think sometimes it's about what you're intending to do. If your intention is to do a for real dungeon crawl, then part of that needs to be the player's understanding that the expectation is they will not be returning regularly. But if it is part of the world, part of the setting that you can do that, sure, why not? I would definitely try to keep that a thing that is done either at the beginning or the end. Because shopping is one of those things that can be either a slow pace or a fast pace. And anytime you're in a hub, there's the opportunity to shop, which can lead to analysis paralysis. There's the opportunity to speak to NPCs that are important to the player character stories or the story of the world. And that if the players are like, okay, we're going to talk to this person and then talk to this person, then talk to that person, that's not a quick scene. That's a long scene. Nothing wrong with it, and it can be a lot of fun if it's done well. But yeah, I would aim for those things to happen at the beginning or at the end, unless returning to base is part of an investigation scene. Actually, Garnet Town Gambit does this. It starts with an opening skirmish, and then it transitions to the middle of the adventure, which is mostly exploration and role playing and investigation, which is done at a hub, and then has the end. The end takes place in two different. There's two major conflicts that occur near the end. So It can work in the middle of the session if it is also related to the investigation. That's if you're trying to figure out the mystery, then I think that's probably fine. But most of the time, I would put it at the beginning or the end. Golden Chaos, my current session framework is pick from. Well, I'm assuming you have more. You just didn't write it down. Exiled to one says just have the roll to return. Say the dungeon will reset if the PCs leave. If they're cool with it, then I'd be cool with the roll to settle it. Resetting the dungeon. There's a risk there. I will say it's very possible, but I would also warn you there's a risk with resetting dungeons because it can feel like negative progress. It can feel like, well, we went in and we fought all these monsters and got all this stuff, but it doesn't matter. It's just going to reset. Just a little warning from me to you. I think it can be done. Skylar Martin says, how do you try to keep the pace up in a game you're learning? I'm trying to run Wifrit 4th edition. It's very crunchy. Well, I think if you are open and clear with your players that this is a game you don't know entirely and you're going to be looking things up as you go, that's probably fine. My advice is for this is almost always the same, which is make a ruling during play and look up rules outside of play during a break or before or after. But if it's something that's taking place during the session, the best answer to keep the pacing, keep that flow, is to make some kind of ruling. You say, okay, we're going to do it this way for now. I'll look it up when we take a break, or I'll look it up after the game is over. Again, your group is probably going to be pretty forgiving if you explain to them that you're learning and you need to focus on the rules. Sometimes you're going to have to look some things up. People are going to be okay. It's not going to harm things too much if you communicate it, And again, you, as the game master, it's you have control over what scenes go in what order. So if you're like, okay, combat scenes are going to be too crunchy, I'm going to have to look up too many things. You can sandwich that in between some just nice rules light role playing, or some nice rules light exploration, or some nice just describing Altdorf and the weird stuff they see in Altdorf. Can be a good way to keep that game moving until you have time to study the rules. But yeah, that's going to happen. That's a natural thing, is just learning rules. It happens to me even now. Like I'll pick up a game I've ran many times, and sometimes I'll occasionally find a rule and be like, oh wow, I forgot about that. I can't memorize 15 different game systems. So yeah, people are probably going to understand. All right. It's about 45 minutes in, so we should probably talk about, like, what does a 4-hour session timeline look like, Ross Watson style. The thing we try to say on the show, there's no one true way, and anything I say here is what works at my table, may not work at your table. Your mileage may vary, but here's my suggestion for it. About an hour before you intend to start is when you want to make sure you've seen everybody's character sheet, that everyone's leveled up appropriately, any kind of administration stuff, ordering food. So one way to do this is like my Star Wars game has a start time of noon, and everybody shows up between 11:30 and noon. Occasionally a little bit later if there's traffic or whatnot. But the secret here is that the actual start time is actually 12:30. I'm giving people that grace period, that grace time to get there, to set up, to, hey, can I see your character sheet? Hey, did you guys remember to add your XP from last session? Who wants food and what are we ordering? Get that out of the way. That's your early part of the session. Then once you actually get started, I like to do a recap. Now, the game master can do it, but I prefer to let players do it. Especially, it's a good time to reward them with resources. If everybody starts with 3 bennies, then you can say, okay, Scott, you're going to recap last session. Here's an extra benny for you. Go. And give them about 10 minutes to do this. Don't stretch it out, but just hit the high notes. And you as a game master, you should already have like a set of bullet points of these are the things that happened last session that are important to remember. Do your little quick recap. So now we've spent, 40 minutes to an hour getting everybody there, setting up, ordering food, and recapping. So the first hour of the actual game, this is a lot of people call this setting the stage. I like to say it's a good time to just remind everybody what the world is like, add some immersive bits if you can, and if you want people to get refreshed on the rules, a small skirmish battle is always a great idea. When I say a small skirmish, I mean a fast combat scene that lasts no more than half an hour or an hour at absolute most. But there's a truism that I think I've learned over the years is that nothing concentrates players' minds on understanding how the rules work like getting into a fight. It doesn't have to be a big fight. It can absolutely be a curb stomp of a bunch of thugs who picked on people they shouldn't have picked on. That's fine. This is not meant to be a uber dangerous, oh my god, we're being attacked by what? Yeah, a skirmish at the beginning of your session is just a good way to get everybody focused. Oh, yeah, that's how combat works. That's how rules work. I'm in. My brain is firing on all cylinders. This is the first hour of your game is a good time to just remind everybody who they are in terms of their characters and what they can do and what the world is like. So that's what I call setting the stage. This is also your time as a game master to adjust. If there's somebody that couldn't make it, or if you are underprepared for your session, which has happened to me, that first hour can also be a really good time for you to jot down some notes about how you're going to adjust the session based on what's going on. So now you've got the next 2 hours. This is the middle of the game, right? And this is where you get your challenges, your interactions, anything that's mechanically dense outside of combat. If you remember the old Shadowrun games, like this would be a great time to do a lot of footwork and hacking into security systems and things like that. Don't jump right into the heavy mechanics in that first hour, but do jump into the heavy mechanics. This is the time to say, oh, we haven't done a chase scene before. Here's how chase scenes work. We're getting ready to we're building up to a chase scene, or we're going to have a short chase scene just to get you familiar with it. However you want to do it. The critical rule of this middle part is to remember: do not start a major encounter within an hour of the end of the session. Okay. Make sure you have at least 90 minutes, if not 2 hours, for a major encounter. So really the midpoint, these 2 hours in the middle of your session, this is really you building up to whatever that big moment is going to be. If it's a scenario where one of the players is going to be focused on, like my gambler was in the Sabak game in Star Wars, this is, let them shine. Have people, the NPCs are like, oh wow, that guy's a really good gambler, or hey, would you like to come be a part of a high stakes game that the Huts are playing in next year? So yeah, just keep the focus, let people role play, give your immersion, your exploration, your interactions. Great time to have NPCs talk to the player characters, have the player characters talk to each other. That's the middle scene. That's the 2 hours in the middle of your session, or 3 if it's a longer session. But you understand what I'm saying. Now, your final 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how big a climax you're looking for, that is your big scene. Let the fight go. Get crazy, get excited, raise your voice. Get players shouting, let's go, when they roll in that 20. Try to build up that energy. And try to keep 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer if your group is really big, but try to keep some space for that falling action at the end. The aftermath. Maybe it's a training montage. Maybe they're building or repairing their starship to be able to take off from the planet after they've dealt with the Galactic Empire's attempt to take it over. But just a little bit, 10, 15 minutes minimum, longer if you want, but wrap things up with a nice little bit of falling action, nice little bit of aftermath. And as everyone's, turning in their character sheets and packing up, this is a good time to say, hey, let's make sure we schedule our next session. Let's, do you guys have an idea of what you want to do going forward? It's good table chat time. It's good, like, hey, your character did something really cool. There's a technique that I like to use to make sure everybody kind of remembers the coolest moments, but that's for a different session or different episode to talk about. That's kind of a basic breakdown of what a 4-hour session would look like if I was the GM, typically. Got a question from Brock 6000. What are your thoughts on using music to set pace in a game? Love it. Love it. In our Star Wars game, we literally have a soundtrack. We have a collection of music that we play, and you can certainly cue it up for big moments. There are some really good streaming shows out there that have like theme songs for villains that they can play to emphasize the villain's presence. If you do that, absolutely bring it in. Music can be really, really useful. I would definitely recommend you mess around with this a lot outside the table, get very comfortable with using it, because the last thing you want to do is in the middle of your game have to pause because you don't remember how to cue up the song, or it's just not coming through the speakers because you didn't connect the Bluetooth, forgot your charger, whatever. If it comes down to it, I would rather ditch the music than spend more than 5 minutes messing around with trying to get the music right. So that's a decision you'll have to make if something goes wrong. But if you have it and you know how to work it, and it's generally not that much of an issue, yes, use music to set the pace. Doesn't hurt. The Exiled One says, new monsters and new stuff, though. And with prep, the PCs can get to the end and defeat the dungeon. Well, sure. New monsters and new stuff. I'm not sure what that's related to. Is that a different? Am I missing an earlier one from you? I'm not sure. Adding new monsters, though, is a great escalation point. Okay, if you're in a fast scene that is starting to become boring, more monsters can show up. Reinforcements can arrive. This can change the energy. This can bring up that sense of stakes. Getting to the end and defeating the dungeon, I mean, yeah, this is another thing we could have a whole episode on, but my general advice is it's okay as a game master. It's absolutely okay if the player characters curb stomp your big bad guy or curb stomp your dungeon. You can always take the stuff they didn't get to or didn't feel challenged by. You can always recycle that later. It's okay. Golden Cast says, my current framework is pick from choice of hooks, then hex crawl to location, then dungeon crawl, then roll to return, deadline to put fire under asses. So it's like a countdown, I'm guessing. Then return, then shopping and downtime. That sounds pretty great. I wouldn't mind. I would like to experience that session because that sounds like fun. Roll to return, deadline to put fire under asses. I like that a lot. Putting fire under ass is actually like that's another way of saying I need this to be a fast scene. I want this to be quick, but also, the vibe, the energy needs to be high. Stefan Roy says, how do you get your players to be more in character and communicate more with each other in character? That's a long topic. That's a big question. Oh my gosh. There's a lot. Yeah, I wish Vera were here because I would love to have her answer this one. How do you get your players to be more in character, communicate more with each other in character? I think this is often a experience thing. And we have a whole episode on how to be a good player, right? And one of the things we talk about when you're a good player, will look for opportunities to role play with other players at the table. that can be something you as a game master can remind everybody of, like in that early 30 minutes of the game. Be like, hey, don't forget, I'd really like to see you guys talking more in character to each other. I'd really like to see you communicating in character. Communication with your players is always like a really great tool. So I always kind of default to that. But that having been said, responding to them in character as often as possible as the game master is one way I like to do it. If someone says, I want to do X, you can say, cool, this NPC responds to that. They, make the world react to their choices and their decisions. And just try to encourage them to, like, how does your character say that? Right? If they say, well, my character wants to tell the king that we want more money. Okay, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say at a role-playing game. But my answer would be like, okay, how do you do that? Like, what does your character do to try and achieve that? And just kind of directly trying to pull it out. I know what it does feel a little more like it takes a little more effort sometimes to draw people out. And there can be players who are less forthcoming than others. Not necessarily a bad thing, but those are a few suggestions. Bring that question back when Vera gets here. I'd like to see what she says. And we got one from Golden Chaos. To those who don't know, roll to return deadline is, if you aren't out of this dungeon by 30 minutes before the end of session, we're rolling on a scary table to see in what shape you get out of the dungeon. Oh, wow. What's that from, Golden Chaos? I'm not familiar with that. That's cool, though. I dig it. So that's interesting. So there's an actual mechanic for if you don't get out of the dungeon within 30 minutes at the end. That's fascinating. That probably does help with pacing, actually. All right, so there's a thing from the index card role playing game that I wanted to bring up. It's this idea called the 3 T's: threats, timers, and treats. If you want a scene to have consequences, it should have a threat. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean combat. It can be a forest fire. It can be, your plasma engine is overloading on the ship, or you're running out of air in your submarine, or you're, trying to defuse a ticking time bomb. But having a threat is a way to add energy to speed up a scene. Very famously, the guy who wrote the Maltese Falcon said that whenever things slow down in his book, he would just have men with guns burst into the room, and that would change. That would tend to change the whole character of that scene, right? So threats is one way to make choices feel like it matters, is add a threat. A timer can also do this, and I mentioned timers previously when I was talking about the bomb. Sorry, or running out of air. But those are actually technically timers and not threats, even though they sound like a threat. But a timer is some kind of countdown, and this can create urgency because you're not letting people take their time. You're not allowing people to create that moment of analysis paralysis. If anybody is curious about that term, analysis paralysis, it is a term that comes up a lot in board gaming and miniature gaming and, well, basically every game. But essentially it means that a player can have so many options that they can start overthinking it and just really trying to decide what the most optimal approach can be rather than taking any action at all. That is a bad thing. That analysis paralysis is a major source of slowing down the game, of breaking your pacing. So if you feel it's also another example of a log jam too. It's where people are like, "Hey, I don't know what to do here. What's the best thing to do? I don't know." A lot of gamers who are not real experienced with role playing games can fall into this trap very easily. So keep an eye out for analysis paralysis. But anyway, a timer, a countdown of some kind can help also break through that. If someone's like, "Well, I'm not sure what to do," you can always say, "Well, you've got 10 seconds to figure it out." The portal's going to close. Guards are going to sweep by on their patrol. There's a village that will come under attack at dawn. These are all examples of timers. It's one of the most reliable tools for accelerating the pace without railroading people, because you as the game master, part of like you setting up the adventure, setting up the world, you're allowed to say this thing is going to happen at X time. That is absolutely part of your wheelhouse. And reminding players, hey, you can do whatever you want, but this thing is going to happen at this time. It's a good way to kind of poke the players with a stick in order to get them to do something. And then lastly is the treats. Treats are rewards, moments of triumph. They are little discoveries or meaningful loots or a key NPC revelation about the story or their character story. You hear one of the guards discussing your long lost brother. That's a treat. These are anything that gives the players a little dopamine hit. It's basically it helps build that momentum. So you can, if you want to think of the threat as the pointy stick, right? The treat is the carrot that's leading them towards the next thing. And we have an interesting comment here. Matthew Adam Style says, not everyone is comfortable playing their character in first person. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And while I like to encourage first person at my table, I'm more than willing to admit that's not going to work for everybody. And some people are going to need to have a little distance between themselves and the character. That's perfectly fine. All right, so yeah, Exxon went dopamine. Yeah, indeed, we all love it. So threats, timers, and treats. That is a tool to help modify or change how a scene is going to build that pace. All right, so how do you end the session? What are the best ways to end the session? Well, the most common one, and one I would definitely caution you about, is the cliffhanger. This is where you end something with something, some major moment unresolved. The villain takes off his mask, and we see that it's actually tune in next week to find out who it is. Right? That's a cliffhanger. It can maximize your emotional investment, and it can maximize the player's desire to come back again next week. But I want to warn you, it can exhaust people. It can absolutely be exhausting. And if they're really in character, people, in my understanding, at least in my experience, players that are really super in character and love their character and love the character story, they don't want cliffhangers because that doesn't give them any time to think about what their character has learned or where their character is going to go or who they want to talk to in between sessions, if that's a thing. On this channel, we've talked about blue booking before, which is a technique that was designed back in the 80s. I won't get too far into it, but essentially it's a way to role play or have your character take actions that are not necessarily at the table during the session, but in between. And cliffhangers absolutely lock you out of blue booking. So I'm going to warn you about that. It can be exhausting. It can lock you out of other possibilities. Don't do it too often. My personal rule of thumb is like no more than 3 in any given campaign. But that's, keep in mind my campaigns don't necessarily last more than a year or two. So if you have a longer running campaign, obviously you can modify that number. Then there's the actual resolution. This is I think the goal for most people is they want to have a session that ends with some kind of lesson learned or theme explored or trope that you managed to spotlight. But basically, if you have a resolution, then the characters are typically safe. They're back at a point where they're not going to be instantly attacked, and they can make camp, they can breathe, they can relax a little bit. This gives players a psychological release, a clean break in between sessions. They don't feel like their character is trapped in some limbo state where they may or may not be in danger at the start of next session. They're pretty sure, okay, at the beginning of next session, I have a more solid idea of what I am, what threats are against me, which is probably none. I will probably start out just in camp or awakening in the inn or whatever. I think if you're doing a long-term campaign, if you're planning to do something that lasts for a year or two or longer, then this is going to be your ideal ending, is a resolution, some kind of resolution, some kind of way to get everyone to a neutral space to where they can plan and prepare and do downtime stuff, because some games have really cool downtime stuff. It also really helps prevent burnout. Burnout can happen if you have 2 cliffhangers in a row. That's happened to me. I'm just like, I can't sustain this anymore. I'm sorry. Resolution is part of the rhythm of your campaign. It is. We were talking about that flow, right? The upbeats, the downbeats. Resolution is a downbeat, but it's a downbeat that promises more, that has that potential, and that's why it's a good way to end your session. Lastly, you can have a hook. Okay, and that can be a resolution that also includes some kind of revelation. That can be like, okay, we defeated the dragon and we claimed his treasure, but part of it is a talking sword that has offered us a new quest. That can be a hook. That can be ending with a hook rather than a resolution. The hook doesn't necessarily trap the players in a moment of tension, but it does give them something to look forward to, and it gives them something to think about in between sessions. A good campaign will have a mix of all three of these things. A really good long-running campaign will have cliffhangers. It will have a lot of resolutions, but it will also have a lot of hooks. And knowing when and how to do these things is really just part of learning to be a good game master, learning to keep the flow going and avoiding burnout, avoiding that fatigue. Again, read the room. Just learn to study your players and try to see if they're all like, oh my God, that was amazing, right? Don't add a hook. But if they're all on their feet like, oh my God, that was so cool, I can't wait, be like, aha. And also, think of it as part of developing your improv skills. Is this a moment that deserves a yes and, or is this a moment we need to be like, cool, congratulations, I'll see you all in 2 weeks. That's gonna be up to you. All right, cool. We got ones from Ice Veins. Hi, Ross. I just wanted to say thank you for always showing and never missing an episode. So far, I have never missed an episode. That doesn't mean I won't. But thank you, Ice Veins. I appreciate you, buddy. The journey with Lorebeards has been a lot of fun. It has been a lot of fun, and I have found that I get a lot of fulfillments out of doing these episodes with you guys. So to me, this is a moment of rising action. Like I show up, I do my 3 hours, and I'm like, oh, when it's all over, oh my God, I feel so drained. Because I've gotten that emotional release out of it. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to try to do my best not to miss any episodes, but I won't guarantee that I can't. I won't guarantee that I won't, I should say. All right, so I've said a lot of things about reading the room, right? How are some ways you can read the room? If you're a game master, obviously to read the room, and I realize this is going to be super obvious, but your head is clear, your mouth is shut, your eyes are open, and your ears are listening. You are paying attention. That's the very first thing that needs to happen, because your eyes and ears are going to be your most important instrument. If the players are leaning back, scanning their phones, having side conversations about things that are not related to the table. Hey, did you see my new car? Right? During the game, that's a sign of the pace is too slow. People are disengaging. If people are debating things or having arguments about planning, like the scene with the troll, right? The troll on the bridge. If they're getting bogged down in planning, and because usually plans are not made in character. Very, very few times have I noticed people being super in character while making a plan. Okay, but it can happen. If people are super in character and it's actually like role play, sit back, let it happen. Just let people talk. But if there's arguments over, I think we should do X, and the other guy's like, I think we should do Y, and it's not going anywhere, that can mean that people's brains are tired. that they need something to slow it down, right? They need to some of that falling action, that downbeat. This third one is a little controversial because some people see players who are inventing their own diversions. Like, I'm gonna go see what this shop of magic items has to sell while you're in the middle of another project, can indicate that the player is distracted and just wants to have something interesting happen. But it can also be part of their character story. It can also be them just wanting to say, hey, my character likes to wander off sometimes. This is going to be another thing that you as the game master are going to have to calibrate yourself to. You're going to have to understand, is this is Randy just doing something random to keep himself entertained, or is this actually something that's important to his character? Frankly, communication can still be a part of this. You can't just lean over and be like, hey, Randy, is this something you're doing for your character, or are you just bored? And if you and Randy have a good rapport, Randy might say, oh no, I have, this is I'm trying to set something up for my black market contact. And you'll be like, okay, cool, no biggie, right? But if Randy's like, yeah, I don't know what we're doing and I got bored, that's a sign that the scene has slowed down, that things have reached a logjam. So random role play can be really good, but it can also be really bad. Just something to think about there. It's not something I can just say is absolutely all the time one thing or the other. This is where you have your 3 T's. You can have a threat, you can have a treat, you can have a timer, but you can also, depending on the game, you can smash cut to the next thing. As a game master, it's perfectly valid for you to be like, okay, guys, and I'm going to assume that this scene is over, and we're going to just transition to where you're talking to the king next. I'm not going to have you role play getting in your carriage and riding all the way up to the palace. Which let's just skip ahead. That's fine. Star Wars, as a role playing game, by the way, because it's very cinematic, it introduces things like a wipe across the screen to transition from one scene to another, because that's very cinematic and it feels very Star Wars. And as I said, I'm running a Star Wars campaign, so that's why I had it in mind, and I wanted to just mention it as something that you can do. You literally can't just say cool, and then now you're here, and the next scene happens. It's not a bad thing to do as a game master. So just sometimes take control and be like, cool, and now we move on. If things are, how can you tell when you need to slow things down, though? I often find that people who are pushing for combat are actually starving for some kind of way to process what the game is about. Now, I know that seems a little counterintuitive because it sounds like someone who's wanting to speed things up. And I'm saying that may not necessarily be what they actually want. If you have a player who loves combat, and especially if a player has invested a lot of his character build into being a good combatant, a good fighter, a good duelist, this can be an expression of that player saying, hey, I have all these cool things, I haven't used them, I'd really like to use one. That's again, it's up to you as the game master to determine whether that's the case or if they're just confused, because it can be a case where players are sitting there like, is the prince a good guy or a bad guy? I forgot. It's been 2 weeks since our last session, and I had a lot happen to me. My dog had to go to the hospital, and I just forgot what happened last session. I don't remember. And you might be sitting there going, okay, cool, I'm gonna I want some combat. I want to just use my stuff on my character sheet that I put a lot of points into, and it would really feel good to just kick some ass because this has been a tough 2 weeks. Talk to the players as the game master and just be like, hey, I noticed you were pushing for combat. What's up with that? Talk to him outside of the table if you want. It's okay. Take a 5-minute break, drink a Coke, whatever. I'm a fan of taking breaks as a game master. If you literally don't know what to do next, take a break. Drink a soda or a water or whatever. Just give yourself a good 2 minutes to calm down and organize your thoughts. You'll usually find what you really want to do with moving ahead. But anyway, so that's an example of when a scene needs to speed up if someone is pushing for combat, but it's important to find out why. If players are showing signs of fatigue, like I talked about, slumping in the chair. I talked about, sitting with your face in your hand, or building a dice tower, literally a tower of dice, because they have nothing else to do. Look for signs of boredom. This can be emotional overload. This can be fatigue. And frankly, we are busy adults. So sometimes a role-playing game on the weekend can be a really great release. It can be a really great experience, but it can also be exhausting. It can be an emotional roller coaster. So just keep an eye on their body language. And lastly, the last sign that the pace needs to slow down is if people are missing key information and they're like always asking you to repeat yourself, or I forgot what's happening. Where are we? If they start asking basic foundational questions, it means the game has moved too quickly. They missed it. They lost it. They forgot it. So when you need to slow things down, you can let the characters take a short rest. You can bring in role-playing questions. You can say, your familiar starts playing with a gold coin he found on the floor, and looks up at you, hoping you'll want to play with him. Any kind of NPC or mascot is a great opportunity to introduce an opportunity for role play when you want to slow things down. You can also ask the player characters questions. Anything that requires reflection, like what's your character's real goal, or what kind of nightmare did you have last night, or give them, if you're giving them an opportunity to reflect on their character, that's also a good way to slow things down. Now, one of the most common killers of flow is a player who freezes up under the pressure of a spotlight. You're like, okay, now it's your turn. What do you do? And they're like, deer in headlights. This can happen. I had a game, an accursed game, where there was a wedding, and one of the player characters was asked to give a speech at the wedding. And I had not warned him ahead of time about this because I wanted it to be a surprise. And the players, deer in the headlights. So that is a common flow killer. It's just putting someone on the spot and they freeze. The worst possible response to this is to ignore them or show frustration. Like, don't just be like, oh, God, I can't believe you didn't prepare something. I can't believe it's taking you this long. Don't say those things. Do not ignore them either. Do not be like, okay, you can say, I'll get back to you. Like, one of my most common ways to handle this is say, okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'll come back to you. I'm going to go handle a different part of the scene, but I'm giving you a chance to organize your thoughts. I'm giving you a chance to collect yourself so that you're ready to be in the scene. Okay. You can take a brief pause to privately ask each player a question, maybe something like what's something they want to achieve, what's something they want to, what's one of their greatest fears. Gathering information as a game master is never a bad idea, especially about what the players want to see. Because if you ask them what's your character's greatest fear, they're going to tell you, and they're going to tell you with the idea that you might use that against them at some point. So don't just file it away, write it down, use that shit. But gathering information is a good technique to distract from someone who's frozen. You can use loaded questions. I'm not saying like hold their hand, but you kind of can lead them down a certain path with the questions. You'd be like, how does your character feel? What's a way you'd like to express that feeling? Or if someone is just not comfortable in first person, like we had a comment about that earlier, you can say, okay, you don't have to say it in first person. Just describe the overall feeling of what you're trying to do. And then you as the game master can kind of incorporate that into the scene. Just the idea is to get them to be relaxed but productive. You want them to be engaged, and that means they need to interact. Just realize that putting people on the spot can cause that deer in headlights reaction. And this again goes more if you're not familiar with them, if they're strangers playing for the first time or at a convention or something like that. That is a thing that happens a lot. Okay, I'm going to look at some of the comments here. The perfect attendance award, Spitfires, this perfect attendance award goes to. Thank you very much. Golden Cat says, I got burnout because I set my own standards way too high and wanted to build the best maps. Yeah, that is a way to get burned out for sure, is to hold yourself to too high a standard. We have, I think our very first episode, we talked about, role playing. The main goal is that everybody has a good time. And as long as that's true, everything else literally doesn't matter. Like if you forget rules, if you get dice rolls wrong, if you bring out the wrong map, even, it's fine as long as everybody has a good time. So yeah, I would say to you, sir, I understand the idea of to have a high standard, but that's an ideal, right? It's not the end. It's something to work towards without making it conditional, I guess. Probably a better way to put it. Yeah, rule 0 is to have fun. Thank you, Focano. Exactly. All right, we got Steph Roy, Ross, the consistent Watson. Consistent? I hope so. Yeah, I'd like to be. Steph Royce has got to go. We'll catch up more tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Glad you stuck around as long as you did. And here we go. Golden Chaos. God, I have built so many towers of dice. I bet I'm willing to wager, Golden Chaos, that you did this when you were feeling bored more often than not. Because I know I do it when I'm disengaged and doesn't feel like I'm just trying to politely wait until it's my turn, for example. I will build the Tower of Dice. It's something I've done a lot. And then we've got one from the Exiled One who says, it's easier for me to GM because I'm engaged with so many things as opposed to just a character. Exactly. That is a reason a lot of people GM, because they like to feel engaged more. But part of your job as the GM is to engage everyone. So think about that too. Anyway. Yeah, we are an hour 20 in. I'm just going to double check to see if I've heard from Vera. Does not look like it. Hope she's doing all right. It may end up that I have to do this whole episode by myself, so be prepared. But she did say she was coming, so. All right. What about combat pacing? Because most sessions, if not, I would say the vast majority of all sessions have some combat in them. It's the single greatest source of pacing problems is going to be combat. And if you have a combat, if you wanted to do a skirmish that was supposed to be 30 minutes and it ends up lasting 90 minutes, that's a major issue. Actually, running a quick skirmish for your group is a fun way to calibrate some of your pacing ability. Just throwing it out there. If that's something you ever want to try with your group, be like, hey, do you guys want to just have a quick fight so I can calibrate how this is supposed to work? It's very valuable. It's a valuable test. The best thing you can do as a game master to keep combat moving smoothly is to know the bad guys. If they're monsters or enemy soldiers or stormtroopers, whatever they are, nothing will slow things down more than you having to read the ability descriptions in the middle of the fight, than you having to look up what this ability does in the middle of a fight. Some of this, is bookkeeping too, keeping track of their hit points and stuff like that. Just make sure you have paper and pencil. That's helpful, but be ready to make adjustments in a combat. If you can trim complexity out of a fight, it should speed things up. Now, this might mean that your party has less resources than you expected, or one player's missing and they're just struggling, right? It can be a scene where I can't believe this is taking them an hour to fight a bunch of quicklings. By the way, quicklings are freaking awful in TNT. They are shockingly strong for monsters, and that bit me on the butt more than once. But yeah, this is where you can remove enemies, like maybe they run for reinforcements, or maybe they just simply run away. Maybe they're like, oh God, this is too strong for us. Player characters are usually players I found tend to be appreciative if the enemies show some signs of intelligence and don't always just fight to the death. You can, of course, use opportunities to tell some of the player character story when bad guys leave. Maybe they recognize one of your players' reputations, or they spot his particular weapon or their particular fighting style, and they can say something about that before they leave. It's just a good it's a way to help you both reduce complexity, speed things up, and also tell a story. It does a lot all in one time to take characters out. Um, if you don't want to trim complexity, because sometimes the complex fights are the most interesting ones, you can make sure that you have a good initiative tracker, because forgetting who goes when can slow things down. There's a whole bunch of great initiative trackers out there. Probably one of the easiest to use and the easiest to find is a whiteboard and a marker, and just prop it up somewhere in view and write everybody's initiative down so they can all see it. And the reason why it's important so they can all see it is so that they know when their turn is coming up. And that's useful because if you don't know when your turn is coming up, you're more likely to disengage. Whereas if you're like, okay, I just finished my turn, there's 6 more people to go before my turn comes up again. This is a good time for me to go visit the bathroom or grab a drink from the fridge and then come back down and re-engage and figure out what's going on and get myself ready for when my next turn is going to come up. So having a good initiative tracker, good idea. Make sure to prompt people if they are next. It's easy to say, okay, we've got Randy's character is next in the order, and Ryan's character is on deck. You're just alerting Ryan to know that he's going to be ready next. And this is the reason for this is because you can have people at the table can be like, oh, I don't know what to do on my turn. Maybe they weren't thinking about it. Maybe they were scrolling their phone, or maybe they were thinking about their character's spell selections or whatever. Doesn't matter. But if you verbally prompt people to get ready, that keeps them engaged. That gets them focused, and it gets them thinking about their next action, which keeps the scene moving. It's very useful. Narrative injections can also help. Now, this is a good thing to use to kind of manipulate that flow, right? The upbeats, the downbeats. Describing how the action works in combat is something I love to do. I love to do it. It's one of my favorite things is to talk about when somebody makes an attack. I describe the attack. I describe, the orc staggers, blood streaming down their face, and they murmur a curse in their native tongue as they prepare to face, to endure your next blow, right? That's fun and cool. Just don't go overboard. But it keeps it does add a little bit of immersion to combat. One of the issues that can happen in combat is you can keep rolling dice, and it can feel like a math exercise because you're like, I rolled this number, I did this number damage, I moved this far, I used this ability. Those can be all very mathematical things. They don't necessarily become something immersive and interesting in that person's imagination. But you as the game master can help with that. You can help that become more immersive, more exciting, more interesting with a little bit of narrative. Just don't go overboard. I have some more here, but I do want to read a super chat before I forget about it. Volcano, thank you so much. In a horribly misbalanced Pathfinder party, I once doubled the Boulette's hit points because it would have been lame to have it fall over on contact. That's legit, Volcano. You are a game master, can modify things on the fly. The key here is to maintain that trust, right? To make the players feel like they trust you enough that you don't do this unless it's absolutely necessary, right? Because if it becomes transparent that you are manipulating things like hit points and armor class, it can take away some of the achievement, the feeling of that we did something, in combat. It can be like, oh well, we were going to win anyway. So yes, absolutely do it. Just try to make it as obscure as possible that you did do it. And you can always backfill, right? Like this game master can always be like, well, make a perception roll. You notice this bulette has, very strange sigils carved into its scales, or it's a particularly robust example of its species. There's like hardly any body fat on this thing, and it's, it looks like it goes to the gym twice a week. Whatever. If you give them just a little bit of explanation for it, people are a lot more willing to accept it as well. That it's just like, wow, this is an exceptionally tough bulette. And even further than that, I will say you can also use this to help tell some story, because you can always say, yeah, it's got these strange sigils carved into it, sigils you've seen before somewhere. And now it's not just a explanation for why this bulette is extra tough. It's also a hook into something else you've done in the campaign. So great point to bring up there. Golden Chaos is talking about Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark does initiative easily. Whoever rolls highest goes first, then clockwise around the table. That you don't have to have a whiteboard. Yeah, that eliminates that problem. The Champions role-playing game. I used to play Champions a lot. Champions had a set initiative, which was, it went in dexterity order, so highest dexterity to lowest dexterity, and the game actually advised you to seat people in order, so that you could just look to your left, and that was the guy who was going to go first around the table. The bad guys had their own initiatives that would interrupt, in between wherever that number would fall. So, but yeah, there are examples of games that do this very, very well. All right, so we talked about initiative, we talked about prompting, we talked about narrative, we talked about retreats, surrender. I don't recommend doing surrender very often, obviously, because there's a lot of issues that can crop up with bad guys who surrender. But if it's a superhero game, it's almost more expected that people will not fight to the death. It just depends on what kind of game you're running, obviously. Don't force any kind of... What I'm trying to say here is that the mopping up of a combat is not as interesting as the combat. That's why surrender is kind of like one of my least favorite options. But it is an option. And then there are games that do this also very well, but you can have minion rules if you're fighting a lot of little guys as opposed to a lot of skilled guys, right? You can simplify hit points. Savage Worlds does this pretty well. Like if they don't have a name, if you're fighting somebody who doesn't have a name, they're called an extra, and they're either up, down, or off the table. Those are the only states that you need to worry about. You don't have to track hit points or wounds. They're either up, down, or off the table. This falls in the category of like house rules and using some optional rules and things like that. Just look into it if it's something that you find happening a lot. This is more of a D&D Pathfinder thing most of the time, just because those games tend to have very granular amounts of hit points for their little villains. So, but that is a rule that you can use to help keep things moving quickly, is to, as Volcano did, modify the hit points of the bad guy. If it's a big bad guy and you want it to be a really more fun and satisfying to struggle a little bit, you can double the hit points. If it's a bunch of minions that really don't matter, you can go on the lower end of the hit point chart and say, well, these guys normally have 8 hit points, but this is a particularly sickly looking group and they only have 4 each. You can just decide that as a game master and make that modification. All right. And then adjusting difficulty. Sometimes the fight can stall out because the dice suck. They're cold. They're freezing cold. I've been there. My first attack was a natural 1, and I was like, oh, this does not bode well. And then I missed for like the next 3 turns. So, yeah, sometimes the dice can just be super cold. Or it can be a case where you didn't realize how strong the enemies were. I never knew that quicklings could inflict so much freaking damage, but they can. Holy crap, they can inflict damage. So if you need to adjust the difficulty in the middle of the fight, it's some easy ways to do this is to modify, like with Volcano, modify things. Armor class can be modified. You can say, hey, their armor breaks. or it's already cracked from some earlier encounter, or again, you can add flavor, you can add narrative, you can make it part of the story as to why their armor is taking damage, and that's why their armor class goes down during the fight. If your players trust you, this is not going to be an issue. Just make sure and tie it into something to make it feel like you're not just deciding to do it, but it's actually part of the story and has a relation to something that's going to go on with one of the villains or one of the character stories. You can also, if the leader dies and there's still a bunch of minions around, maybe the minions just flee. Maybe they're like, well, you killed the head of the snake, we're not going to stick around. They're just going to run away. And if they scatter in all directions, the player characters are going to be less likely to try and chase them all down. This is also going to be a factor of like learning your group. Some groups are like, no one survives. I've been in groups like this where they're like, literally, we're going to track each and every single one of these guys back to their lair. That's going to change your decision about whether you want guys to run away, but they can run away. Yeah, those are some suggestions on how to adjust the difficulty mid-fight to keep the pace moving forward. And then you get to your campaign level pacing. Let's take another quick look at these comments here. Golden Chaos. I like Black Hack's initiative. Roll under your decks. If you succeed, you go before the enemy. If you fail, you go after them. That does seem like something you would want to track somewhere. But yes, I like that. That is cool. Fun fact, one of the most common things we discuss at my table for like what we want to modify or change since I started gaming with this group 5 years ago has been initiative systems. And we have tried a lot. We've tried the random roll. We've tried one side goes and the other side goes. We've tried declaring, we've tried a bunch of different ways to do it. So it's interesting and fun that we're apparently not the only ones who are thinking about how to do initiative differently. Also, Fokeda points out, knights almost always took captives for ransom. Any nobles amongst the enemy forces would be auctioned back to the defeated lord. Yes, historically accurate. I think, to me, the best example of this would be a way to avoid a TPK. Guess what? We're doing TPKs next week, so we will be talking about this for sure then. One way to avoid a TPK is to take the heroes captive rather than kill them. I feel like that's a more interesting story most of the time for the player characters to be the ones who are taking captive rather than the player characters taking captives, because most of the time, player characters are not very well equipped to take captives or hold them or, not abuse them. So something to watch out for. But yes, if you think it would work great, you can just say, okay, the enemy leader could surrender and say, I'm offering you my sword in exchange for you ransoming me back to my family. That's an absolutely valid way to do it. Fokeda says minions are great too. Each enemy in this horde has like 4 hit points, and if they take damage, they explode, and you stop worrying about them. That is exactly why minions can be great. You can always bring in more. You can always bring in more minions. There's literally no reason you can't add more minions to a fight if you think it would be fun. Just definitely think about it hard before you do it. But yeah, you can crunch all you want. We can make more on the minions. I agree. Picano says, if you're using ethereal beings like ghosts or wraith, unsummoning them after a necromancer dies or an artifact is displaced is fun. Yeah, that's a really good point. If it makes sense, you can have something get changed in the environment that can lead to unsummoning or causing the enemies to flee or vanish. That's a very good point. Yeah, that is dependent on the situation that you set up, but yeah, very useful to keep that in mind as a tool to use to keep a scene going. All right, so campaign pacing. Every campaign is going to have its own different flavor. Every campaign is going to have its own different, for lack of a better word, flow. Even though flow is something we are discussing as a far more defined term. But you know what I mean. can be players who are in a campaign that are they are people who like to dive deep into the lore. They want to study the lore of the world. They want to know the history of NPCs. They want their characters to be able to quote, a long dead general or something like that. And there can be players who are very casual and are just like, man, I'm just here for the vibes. I'm here for a good time, not a long time. I want my bard to sing some cool songs and fight some orcs and then like spend all my money on ale like a rock star at the end of the session. There's nothing wrong with those two approaches, but it does mean that they're going to have different approaches to the pace of the campaign. So I'm going to say that milestone leveling up is my favorite way to do it. I just don't like bookkeeping, but I think also it's helpful for pace because with XP totals and keeping track of XP totals, that means that people can get that feeling of a random power up in the middle of a session. Like if I walk into a session and I'm 5 XP short, right? You know what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to be thinking about how I could get that last 5 XP. And then unfortunately, that's going to distract me from the story. It's going to distract me from what's really going on. So I'm going to urge you, I'm going to recommend, I guess is probably the best way I could put this, to use milestone leveling rather than the standard leveling if you're playing D&D. And if you're not playing, if you're playing something where you have a lot of other types of XP, you can still do a milestone type session just by saving it up and doling it out in chunks. And Vera's here. Hey, Vera, welcome.
Whoa, hi. Forgive me my lateness. I am getting back from my brother's wedding, so I have been flying all day, and that has been an adventure. So, hi.
Boy, are your arms tired?
The rest of me sure is.
Well, everyone, Vera, my lovely host, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vera. Verisimilitude. Well, I am one of the writers for Warhammer 4th Edition. I work on Age of Sigmar. I work on the Old World RPG. I'm a thing maker. I'm part of the wonderful podcast Lorebeards. I do stuff. I make things. I exist online in a sphere of creating stuff. Hello.
Welcome. I'm so glad you made it because I was like, oh my god, let's try to keep going.
Well, you had to pace yourself, Ross.
I did have to. I literally had to. We have covered quite a bit. We've talked about the difference between pacing and flow. We've talked about fast scenes and slow scenes and why those things exist. Mm-hmm. We've talked about doing a timeline for your session and understanding that you shouldn't start a big boss fight with only an hour to go.
Sensible. Yeah, or any combat, really.
And that is the majority of what we have covered so far. I was just about to get into, we just finished talking about ways to speed up a combat scene if it's starting to bog down. And I was just about to get into the campaign part. But if there's something that you'd like to talk about of any of those things or more, I urge you to step in and be like, let me talk to you guys about pacing. And here's what Vera thinks.
No, I think that combat pacing, like how to accelerate, that's an important topic. All I can think of is how to pace out recap, which I think you've just done admirably. Supposing someone comes in a little late to the session, ha ha ha.
And I was just recommending that everyone use milestone XP as often as possible, so that you don't have the situation where you could start the session needing only 5 XP to level up, and that's the only thing you can think about. You know.
Oh yeah, I think that milestone XP works. I have seen effective use of ambition XP in the Warhammer games, things that are more character related, like rewards for individual progress that has its own pitfalls, and that people can compete to drive the game a little bit, which also affects pacing when everybody's got their own side quest that is character mandatory to complete to advance their own skill set. It can become complicated in larger groups especially, but
something I was talking about with the fast scenes and the slow scenes is that my ideal is what's called the balanced approach, where you sandwich your fast scenes in between 2 slow scenes to give people opportunities to engage with get immersed in the world, right, with the long descriptions and the detail and the more character focused stuff before you dive into the fast scenes, which are like the car chases and the combat and diffusing a bomb, things of that situation.
Yeah, I think that's effectively just the importance of tempo, right? Like it's useful to have variance in any kind of creative activity. This happens in symphonies, it happens in books, from sentence to sentence even. It belongs in your RPG sessions. It's important to have room to breathe after like an intense section, especially if it's emotionally intense or you rely on one of the players to go all out full bore. To that extent, we talked about Spotlight, right? We talked about Spotlight during a few of our earlier episodes, the idea that it's important to acknowledge when certain characters are very scene crucial and they're very active in a given moment, and then to shift that. Like that's part of pacing, is to making sure that you cycle that around and have the same character ideally not be at the center of every moment of the game all the time for multiple sessions in a row.
One of the things I brought up was that Spotlight can be something that kills the pace if you have a player who is unprepared or hesitates or gets kind of lost when they're asked to take the spotlight. And what are some ways you can do to manage that?
Well, there are definitely some players who are, I would say, less prepared, especially at the start of someone's gaming career, to improv critical scenes, right? They are easy to catch off guard, and they might need time to collect their thoughts, which is okay. It's fine to take your time, but it can slow down the game. So a few things you can do are cut back and forth, like address what someone else is doing while something is going on, like come back to them. You can do this in combat also. This is totally okay. Initiative is a suggestion. You can...
I have some players who would consider that fighting words.
Well, hey.
No, but that's fun. I agree. I agree with you that at the end of the day, initiative is a construct. It is not. It is literally just a way to organize things so that nothing happens all at once.
It's more like guidelines, yeah.
So you see this one, this initiative system. It's more of a guideline, you see.
You can go meta. You can take the approach that you are going to tell someone ahead of time what things they might need to have thought through before the session. There are some players, and you'll know at your table, like, who would benefit from this. They could benefit from having thought through certain encounters, certain ideas before they sit down. If they know they're going to need to have decided A, B, and C before they get to the session, then when their character does it in the moment, they'll at least have a foundation to base that off of. Maybe they'll change their mind, and that's okay, but they won't be caught unaware in such a way, right? This can often be useful for like big meta character choices, like things that are going to affect their progression perhaps, or have consequences that knock on for the campaign. That kind of thing can slow down the game because people will be indecisive. They won't really know in that second what they want to do that's going to determine the course of the next 40 sessions. So a heads up for that can be useful.
One thing I was going to talk about, if you'd like to move on to, I was going to talk about the common pacing mistakes to avoid.
Ooh, the easiest one, the number one is like getting stuck in minutia. It is easy to assign roles and gameplay mechanics to things that are unimportant and uninteresting in an effort to simulate the world. And this is admirable, right? This is we like simulating. We like to have this experience, like exploring the world we're in, like seeing stuff. But in effect, this can be really slow. There is a notorious story at my table where while playing Dark Heresy, we use the requisition system from 2nd edition to try and procure soup. And this didn't work. And it kept not working for several hours, actually.
Jeez.
It was not thrilling, I'll say, not scintillating.
Yeah, this is one of the things I talked about early on was that pacing is really just about managing the space in between meaningful choices. And if you're going to get lost in the minutia, you're actually extending that space. If there's nothing, if it's just trivial, right? There's no meaningful choice involved. Like the soup. The soup is fun. It's interesting. It's cool for about 5 minutes. And after that point, it becomes less and less valuable to the table, right? It becomes more and more of a distance between us and our next meaningful choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and like this is addressed in a lot of rule books that rolling the dice for things that are both interesting and consequential, and if something is neither, maybe it shouldn't be a roll anymore. It's okay to say, all right, well, you eventually do it, and it's like abstractly consider that they've taken more time to do this than expected.
Here's something I was going to say, and I really want to get your feedback on it because this is very much my opinion and very much my experience, and not. I would like to get a different perspective on it before I go talk about this in depth to other people. So y'all are my guinea pigs today. I don't think you should try and force pace. I think you should nudge rather than shove. You know what I'm saying? There are times as a game master you can just cut to the next scene. That is a tool in your toolbox. You can just say, okay, and you get to the castle after 2 days of journeying. You're now at the front gate, and the guard asks you your business. That is absolutely a tool in the GM's toolbox. So when is the right time to nudge, and how would you nudge people to change to try and get the pace where you want it to be?
So first off, I'll say two things. One, I prefer slower games. I enjoy them. I think that it's fun to explore your character's mentality and to discuss things in character and to really tackle things as a group. And I like all of that. I'll also say that it can be very important to truncate things sometimes to accelerate the pace, and that I am not especially good at forcing / encouraging that, which we'll see during the upcoming 14-hour Empire of Satanis one shot. So that'll be proof positive what I'm talking about. But
if you want to know more about our upcoming Empire of Satanis one shot, go check out our episode on cursed RPGs. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, the school year is ending. I'll be prepping that very, very soon. I'm excited. I have begun the background work, and oh god, I'm gonna have to make my own version of the rules for everybody.
I think another common mistake with pacing is if people are having a debate about the planning. And the example I use is like you come to a bridge, it's guarded by a troll. The troll demands a toll before he allows you to cross the bridge. Okay, and the player characters need to decide whether or not they want to fight the troll. Pretty simple, but I have seen groups fall completely into disarray trying to figure out whether or not they want to do a very simple thing. And I think one of the mistakes is to let the debate run without stepping in.
Yes, it's positive if they're debating it. It's positive if they're engaged and immersed, but you don't want to let these discussions go forever. Something that I try to do when I play like leader style characters is even out of character. I listen and then I summarize the options and I ask people to weigh in on them and like make that conclusive ideally and like drive that because it's harmonious, I find, to as this is like a whole other subject about like what it is to like lead an RPG parties, but it's useful to do this to listen in and then like to summarize and just like take people's weight on the final options you have and hopefully let that come to consensus. The GM can prod for this also. If it's obvious the conversation is going in circles and they must choose one of 2 or 3 things, you can tell them they must choose between 1, 2, or 3 things. I have seen circular whirlwind logic and like looking at possibilities that are irrelevant come up plenty of times. Yeah, waffling, this happens, eternal debate. Not fun for anybody except that one guy. And as exciting as it is for them, perhaps it's bad pacing, right? Because the worst example of slow pacing happens outside of the purview of the narrative. It happens like in the meta space because no one's in character, no one's getting to roll die. You're just discussing what ifs and abstracts, and kind of this applies in life also. The worst kind of hesitation is one where you are entirely divorced from the activity, right?
Yeah, Fakano says we called this waffling, debating eternally. And roll to connect to the Wi-Fi. Fakano also points out that, or sorry, Golden Chaos points out that we must use GURPS with all of the optional rules.
What I want is to need to cross-reference my rule book so we can then begin arguing. That's my ideal. My ideal. Just like let that dictate the next 6 hours of play.
So one of the things I talked about with regards to ending sessions was that there's basically 3 ways. There's the resolution way, which is like, hey, you accomplish the thing, everybody gets a chance to sort of reflect on what that means, and you move on. The other option is the hook, where it's a resolution, but you beat the dragon and you find a magic sword in its hoard that tells you there's another quest to go on, and you're like, oh, cool. So you have something to look forward to next time, but it's still mostly a resolution. And then the third is a cliffhanger. And my advice that I'd given was that you want to cliffhanger should be the most rarely used, because it makes it more difficult to pace sessions when people don't have that break. What's your opinion on this? I mean, I'd love for you to tell me I'm wrong, because I might be wrong.
So categorizing things is fun and being done kind of arbitrarily. I would propose there is an important subdivision of the cliffhanger, though, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would call those the scenic cliffhanger and the sudden cliffhanger.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, a scenic cliffhanger is when in your penultimate session of the game, the party enters the Dark Lord's chamber, and standing before them, clad in dark armor, is this ominous figure who has played into all of their lives, upended them, caused turmoil, and he booms, "Stand at the ready, and I'll see you next week." A sudden cliffhanger is, all right, well, as the troll attacks, guys, it's like it's 11 p.m. And
I gotta work tomorrow.
I can see that, yeah, there's a lot of turns left in here. Why don't we come back to this?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's ideal if you can pattern your cliffhangers so that the party is like excited for what's happening next. And it's okay to cut early if you understand that's going to be the case. If your pacing is going to get weird if you don't. Obviously not ideal, but there have been times when it's been like, all right, we're going to start a combat soon, and this is like a nice moment to put a bow on things, and this can work. That's easier to swallow if you're playing weekly, but
yeah, I've done it with my group, and we play every other week. But I have ended the session slightly early, maybe an hour or two at most, and to be like, we're about to get into a really big fight, and we don't have enough time to explore that, so let's pause here. Because one of the greatest mistakes you can make pacing wise is to try and start a boss fight with only an hour left.
Yeah, that's it's way cooler to end on entering the Dark Lord's chamber than it is to end on all right, well, there's 2 turns left in this hold person, and yada yada yada. I think hold person is concentration anyway. It doesn't matter. The point is that it's exciting to have the anticipation of what's to come next, and less exciting to have a week to plan your next move in combat.
Right. Yeah, that's a very different kind of thing.
Well, that's why I'm calling it scenic, right? A scenic cliffhanger is where you can see before you a lot of possibilities that makes you look forward to the next session. A sudden cliffhanger is closed. You are looking at your exact next step because there is going to be a correct move you come to. You're in the middle of something. It's not too exciting to pontificate on. It's more of an anxiety-inducing thing where you know you're going to have to take some sequence of actions, and they're logical but still possible to debate endlessly because you have the time, and a little less good for out of game morale.
The majority of what I've been talking about was how the game master can help move things along pacing wise, because there's just more tools and more agency in the game master's hand than the players. But what would you like to get into how the player can help shape the pace of the game?
Well, like I said, I feel that it can be really useful, and this is like kind of a controversial opinion, to have a character who takes charge of things, who is sort of a facilitator, certain kind of group for this, but a character who will sum up what the options are and be a driving force can be really useful in some groups. Say like, all right, well, we have to either do this or do this. So who's in favor? Right? Because it's always better, I feel, to have discussions about like what to do next that cause waffling, that cause slowdown in character. It's always better to let that be a mouthpiece for what the characters are about. Doing that in the abstract is the worst for pacing. And as a player, you can take it back to the table when that happens. You can say like, well, while this is happening, I'm going to go here and advance things a little bit. This isn't like sneaking off on your own. The disarm traps is the rogue. This is like, well, I'm going to ask our NPC here, well, what do you think of X or Y? And that gives the GM a chance to come in and provide more context, maybe make the situation a little more immediate, make it grounded again in the narrative. Because the more things are grounded in the narrative space, the better it'll feel to be moving slowly. A trip through the flowers is more fun than planning said trip through the flowers, map in hand.
Well, I was going to say, I think players tend to slow the pace down when they are focusing on downtime activities or spending time planning or debating, or if they're pursuing an NPC conversation in depth. None of those things is necessarily bad. It does mean that the pace is slowing down.
I will say that for like meta decisions, like downtime stuff, if it has like structural meaning for the game, it is best to do outside of the game. That is a great use of homework of blue booking and stuff, is to have someone do that if possible between sessions. For NPC conversations, players can steer them toward more productive things, but they're oftentimes great for verisimilitude. They're useful for fleshing out personalities, make memorable moments. So it depends. The GM is sort of in control there, though, to draw the line, to drop the infamous as that happens, as you do that, etc.
I do that a lot.
Those are effective tools the players kind of have, but only within the limited agency what their character is doing. And it takes a little bit of genre awareness and sometimes initiative on behalf of the party for a player to do that kind of thing. It requires some vision. You don't want to like be bossing around the table, setting your own pace. It's rude to determine the pace for the entire party, but it can be kind of torturous if nobody is setting it. So,
well, players can also accelerate the pace, and the ways that this is usually done is they act impulsively, or they lean into chaos, or they engage in a very aggressive, or sometimes just really creative strategy.
Yeah, which can be great, but it can also be frustrating, both
Right.
for the GM who has all of their preparation skipped, and for the players who want to immerse themselves in the world but are suddenly plunged into this maddened combat that they then have to justify afterwards. So,
Listen, I'm not saying I have Leroy Jenkins into battle, but I have had chicken after I have ran into a fight. So
bless your heart. At least you had that.
At least I had chicken. I think though that if you're not a super experienced GM, it is probably wise to try and steer back to whatever content you have prepared. Okay, but if you are confident in your game mastering skills and your DM skills, I think you should try and lean into the players' changing of the pace. Reward it, because most of the time, in my experience, most of the time, players that are actively engaging with your game will change the pace. They have proactive things that they're trying to accomplish, or generating their own story, trying to create momentum for the story in the game. There's a lot of things that players can do that affect your pace that you actually really want, that can be very, very good. And learning to distinguish those two things is that skill level, right? That confidence.
Absolutely. To return to milestone XP, part of the reason that milestones as narrative beats are so useful for divorcing meta concerns from the narrative is that whether it's individual ambitions or monster XP, you want the player's motive to accelerate the pace to be divorced from like making their guys stronger. Usually you want it to be narrative, related to what's at hand, and letting the way they set the pace be something that's rewarding for the entire table in terms of the plot. It is fun to roll with. You will get a sense like what your table is like, what they're about, but the worst situation I feel is one where somewhat transparently the character's actions are meant to justify mechanical reward. And you see this with murder hobos. You see this with someone who's sort of running the table over to push their own plot line. Neither of which is great for cohesion, especially if the characters aren't all agreed on what they want to be doing. If the whole table wants to just like bulldoze things and like run fast and break stuff, that is a table you can run if it's fun for everybody. Fuck it, have fun. But it is frustrating for players who prefer a more methodical approach or who really want to just enjoy NPC dialogue and like get to know everybody if everything is breakneck, which is why alternating pacing is so important and useful.
Good point. One of the things I said that is a very handy tool for a game master to help change pace is to have a voice in the party, like an NPC, a mascot, a familiar. There's always there's almost always, not always, but almost always, some form of NPC that a group travels with. And that can even be like the paladin's horse, or, you know, there's a lot of options for having one of these. And they are very useful because I find them a great way to remind people of ticking clocks or timers or threats that they may not be aware of or that they've forgotten. It's just a handy way for a game master to be like, hey, do the thing. You have the mascot point out something.
I love the idea of the paladin's horse, like Mr. Ed going, hey there, adventurers. Are we going in through the secret tunnel in the moat or kicking in the front door? Decide now.
I mean, I don't recall offhand if the
this too is a useful tool.
Does paladin mounts talk in 5.5? I don't think they do.
Well, if you want them to be a useful mouthpiece for the GM, they sure do.
Well, but a horse can project impatience. A horse can, paw at the ground. A horse can even like refuse to move. A horse can slow things down. It can be like it just wants to stay put. You tug on the reins and it doesn't want to go anywhere, right? The verbal part is not required.
But it helps. So if the Leroy Jenkins reference is peak millennial humor, what is the Mr. Ed reference? Where are we now?
that's boomer humor for sure.
Oh, that's got to be beyond boomer. What is Mr. Ed?
Pretty sure he's boomer.
61.
I think so.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that is boomer humor. Okay, I've done it.
We have a comment from T. Blam who says, the horse is the child of a horse-headed minotaur and a centaur. It's a normal horse that can talk. That is all. My dad was a minotaur. My mom was a centaur. I look just like a horse. That's a backstory. That's a hell of a backstory. So many questions.
I like that. It's like the character who's a humanoid. It's like if a man and a woman had a baby.
I may have to write up this NPC on my Patreon. Frankly, right now I'm getting ideas
I do like
for this
that.
talking horse right now. I'm like, oh my god, that's so funny. I love it. Love it.
For the GM in need of a voice but no hands.
That's good. Yeah, I would say if you have a proactive player, that could be a really great asset to your pacing if they're So empowering them can be useful rather than trying to shut them down. But there's also the idea of the campaign's pacing, right? Like the narrative pace of the campaign. If you are, because sometimes you can have whole sessions that are just about role playing. I have had that happen, and it can be magical. Can be magical. And you can have sessions that are mostly combat, and that can also be magical. But there's a risk when you have too much of a focus. That's all I'm going to say, is it can be risky to be the case.
Yeah, like there is some element of party preference that goes into this. There's some element of execution that goes into it. I will say, even in a campaign that is the most roleplay rooted and conversational, it will be really important to have a couple of combats, or at least encounters that are combat styled. You could run a Barney and Friends game that still benefits from initiative order sometimes, right? Like there's not to say Barney's gonna like suplex people, but that having stakes and like timed actions, and that's useful. It adds tension. It adds pressure, which is important. And in a similar vein, even in a campaign that's all about fighting and doing cool stuff, you need to have some kind of downtime, some kind of conversational element to make the stakes of what you're doing land, and make it feel like it matters that you're making these choices, they're doing this stuff to people, that you're doing violence. It's what the players really want. They might not know it, but they crave that. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, love the idea that players secretly crave violence. But secondly, I would like to challenge anyone out there who is a fan of our show. If you want to make a supercut of every time we've referenced wrestling, it's probably going to be pretty big, because suplexes and kayfabes, we talk about that shit all the time.
Yeah, season 1 edition of Lorebeards and RPG references wrestling.
I'm going to take a quick short break. Can you run the show for just a few minutes before I come back?
Yeah, absolutely. That takes us into another cool pacing concept, which is what to do when someone steps away from the table. And I would say that you can do a lot of things in that downtime. You can cover loose ends, you can recap things, you can do preparatory back-end work, you can check in on things that aren't relevant to them directly. There's a lot of stuff you can accomplish if for some reason someone's like, all right, give me 15 minutes. Putting the whole table on pause is often an option. It's important to take breaks during your sessions, but I would think that in a moment where you've got a player who's occupied and there is waffling to be done they can't weigh in on directly, that is a great time just let people argue in a meta sense, because that'll make the rest of the game run a lot faster. Ross has disappeared. Ross will return, I promise. I have faith in him. Well, it's not always bio, right? Like people can get like important phone calls. It depends. I agree that like structured bio is nice, but if you have one of those lulls where for some reason the whole table can't like lock in for a moment, that can be a really good time to discuss something that was like left on the plate that might slow down pacing, right? I think it's effective. Other tools. I think it's nice to have like post-game wrap-up. A lot of good pacing happens in preparation and in like afterward, discussing what might happen in the next session. This helps the GM also. I think that it's really beneficial to key in your GM as to what you might have planned to make things flow a little bit better, to provide structure that'll benefit everybody ultimately, because it's a team effort, right?
Indeed it is. A team effort.
Yeah, just there's a meta to pacing. There's a preparatory quality that goes into it, and squeezing in extra time to plan out things to allow for waffling and decision and discussion can be cathartic in some ways. Like players will be happy to just have the time to do this. We're talking about what to do if someone steps away from the table, how to feed that into better pacing for the rest of the session, how talking a little bit after session about what you might want to do the next time around can get people in the right headspace, etc., especially with cliffhangers, for example.
I would say, so a couple things we talked about was the idea of ending with the hook, and we talked about cliffhangers, and we talked about a few other things, but ending with the hook is probably one of the best ways to have a satisfying climax to your campaign, to your session. The end of the session, have a big high note. you end with that hook. And if you've built up to that point correctly, it will feel very emotionally satisfying. So the pacing is building up to the climax rather than the climax itself.
Yeah, and then after that, your players will have like things they're thinking about. They're excited for the next session. And a lot of the time at my table, we wind up talking about what might happen next. And as the GM, your job is to take notes on this because they are scripting out possible beats in the next session. And this whole thing feeds back into itself as something that engenders better pacing because you're going to find yourself able to take all of this and apply it.
Okay, I hate to say this. It's so obvious. It's so obvious, but it needs to be said. Keep an eye on the clock.
That's true.
I know it's super basic, but it's very valuable to have an idea, to gauge where you're at, like to understand your progress through the time allotted for your session. So I will check my time quite a bit. I will look at the time probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 times an hour. I'll look and just see where I'm at because it helps me gauge. It helps me adjust.
Yeah, like as an ADHD demon, I am time blind, so I benefit from this a lot. I definitely try to keep bounded to reality in this way.
I know I was like, do I really want to say this out loud? I feel like it's just so basic, but I was like, I probably better.
Well, it plays into why it's so useful to have an idea of what your players are up to, what they want to accomplish, because it'll make your pacing better if you think, okay, they're going to spend at least 30 minutes doing this and this, then we have an NPC they're going to probably meet, and if they don't do that, they'll start this, and we could like have the combat happen here if they wander in there. If not, they'll be out here, and yada, yada, yada. All of that's beneficial, right?
And it doesn't hurt to build in some flex time. It doesn't hurt to plan for maybe half an hour less to give yourself some room, because I think Vera will absolutely agree with this. You never know which NPCs the player characters are going to enjoy the most. Sometimes they're going to grab somebody out of the background and be like, that person must be protected at all costs, and we need to know every single fact about their existence.
I've been at sessions that were entirely derailed by Wendy, the witch sniffing pig. Everyone loved Wendy. There was like a long quest to acquire Wendy.
I haven't even met her and I love her. That's a fantastic name.
Everyone loves her.
So that is
she can't actually smell witches, but it's fine.
Reminds me of what's the name? I'm sorry. From the Chronicles of Prydain.
Oh,
yeah, there's a book series that for my youth that I used to love, and the Disney made a movie about it called the Black Cauldron, and the pig, Hen Wen was her name. Hen Wen was a pig who could read the future.
Aww.
From those books, Hen Wen. So Hen Wen reminds me of Wendy. That's really cool.
Wendy is like that, except entirely useless.
Okay, so I see a comment I'd like to react to. Golden Chaos says here, not to harp about Shadowrun, but having real-time torch timers helps a lot with keeping an eye on time, and also the aforementioned roll. The roll to return to town is something Golden Chaos was talking about earlier. It's a really fascinating idea where if the party does not return to town within 30 minutes of the end of the session, he has a chart of bad things that can happen to them. It's like, oh wow, that's a hell of an incentive. I wonder if that's from a game. I don't know. So real-time torch timers from obviously Shadow Dark. I assume he's talking about Shadow Dark rather than Shadowrun. But Shadowrun has its own.
This reminds me of Darkest Dungeon as well, the video game, wherein you have a torch that'll burn down and things get weird when it cuts out. So you're motivated to move fast once that fully burns out, or really to keep it out to exploit the difficulty. But that's another concern. Very meta.
I was just going to say about Shadowrun, it does have a built-in aspect of the game, which is collecting information. It's called legwork. Right, that's what they call it in the game. Collecting information about the mission you're about to do and planning for that, acquiring the gear for it. It's many Shadowrun sessions feel like a miniature heist movie where you have that scene where they all, figure out how they're going to get in and get the money and get out, right? Some people really love it. I happen to be one of those people who really loves it, but there are games like Blades in the Dark that abstract that entirely. And that can be, both of these approaches can alter the pace considerably, because if you like planning and you like the legwork and you like the idea of we're building up to this big heist, then maybe that's what you want to dwell in. That's where you want to savor the moment. But if you're more excited about the heist itself, like the actual action of getting in and getting the thing and getting out, then maybe you want to abstract the planning side and focus instead on what is more fulfilling. It's just going to depend on the group.
Yeah, and like this is the kind of thing you can kind of prepare for during session 0, is like what kind of stuff your party prioritizes, what they're fascinated by, what they want to engage with. Some groups will really, really, really want to do planning. They'll want to invest in staging out every step of things. They'll want to do city building. They'll want to micromanage their items. They'll want to do all of this stuff. Other groups are allergic to this. They'll be made miserable, or they have one person who wants to take charge of it that should be given that task during downtime, right? Pacing grinds to a halt when you have like some kind of activity, whether it's a mechanical system or a out of structure concern that only one person cares about, that takes up an inordinate amount of session time. Like I've been part of games where there were subsystems that became very important to play because one player really liked them that no one else could interact with, and they would define like literal hours of sessions, and it was rough.
Shadowrun also has that problem with the way that hacking worked, or decking in Shadowrun is the term, but it's hacking computers. And especially in older editions, it was very much like a solo dungeon crawl while everyone else went out for pizza.
Yeah, and like that feels very cool to do, but it like builds in the notorious, okay, the rogue sneaks into the dungeon type thing and starts disarming traps and exploring stuff. They're charting the whole thing by themselves. This is like considered a very bad thing in many systems, but it's mandatory in some others. And pacing out how long that takes and how much emphasis is placed on it and what other players can do in the meantime can help a lot.
Right. And we have a comment from Cold Chaos that rolling to return is a mechanic from 5 Torches Deep, which is a lightweight OSR system. Thank you for mentioning that, because I was curious where that source is from. That's interesting. Yeah. So calling for excess numbers of dice rolls can adjust pacing. A good example is I was playing against the Giants as Bard, and I had a proficiency in stealth, and there was a cave with some goblins, and I wanted to go kind of see like what I could see. And I told the game master I would like to sneak in and take a look around. He's like, "Cool, make a stealth roll," and I did. And he says, "Okay, you get 15 feet in. Now you need to make a second stealth roll." And I immediately was like, "Okay, I'm not exploring this cave." I am not going to explore this cave 15 feet at a time, making a dice roll every time. That is A, tedious, and B, disrespectful to the rest of the team who are going to sit around and watch. It's not a solo mission,
I will say not all players would have that presence of mind. Some will just keep going, but you got to know your table, know who's like receptive to little hints like that. And
so in that specific example, I think that was calling for too many dice rolls. And just I wanted to dwell on that a little bit, where the number of dice rolls that are involved can slow down a scene. If you wanted that scene to be a fast scene, if you wanted that scene to be quick and involve like raising the stakes, a single stealth roll could be like, then you go in, you see the ritual where all the kidnapped people are about to be sacrificed on the altar of the dark god, and the guy raises his knife and you only have a few seconds. What are you going to do? Like, that is a far more faster paced version of the same scene.
Yeah, but then you've got the one party member doing that, which can work depending, but I feel almost like making it like clearly ominous with like a lot of dice rolls can be a blockade, something to be clambered over that indicates come back later. There's some utility there.
Yeah, it might have been the game master trying to subtly signal that this was too strong for us. Quite possibly. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Well, you can use like bad omens as a GM to sort of try and ward people away from things that are bad ideas to pursue in the moment, which is sort of a factor of pacing, sort of a factor of balance, but you have to make good on that then, which is its own challenge.
I would love to hear an example of how this works.
Well, when you have players approaching a really bad idea, you can have them roll intuition and things of that nature to intuit that it is a really bad idea. You can give them chances to discern the relative danger level, what they're getting into using various skills. This will slow the game way down, but like people notice. Pacing is a tool to set tone.
Mm-hmm.
When suddenly the game is turned into your characters in slow motion evaluating the situation they're in front of, people will start to notice. You can put the brakes in the game. If they're like charging around doing things willy-nilly and suddenly they're being asked to carefully examine everything that is happening, it will change the vibe and it will make them reconsider perhaps, especially if everything they're noticing seems bad. You can use this to give them a chance to perhaps not miss things that are important, to ward them away from a really bad idea. And this isn't like forcing them. This is just giving them an opportunity to be better informed in their decision making.
Which, being better informed decision making is going to play a big part in our next episode, because that one's all about TPKs.
And I believe what I'm discussing right now is one tool to ward off a TPK. Like, hey, you notice all of these guys are packing heat. Are you sure you want to do this?
We will. This material will appear again. Because "are you sure" is a great game master way to say you're about to be in some serious trouble, including a TPK. We have a question here, I think, that is interesting, and I'd like to see if you'd like to read it. I think you could talk about this one.
One thing I'll add: pacing when the party gets split up. Make sure you are swapping back and forth between the players and have a plan for bringing them together. Yes, it is, I would say, always good to have some kind of plan when the party is splitting. I am pro splitting the party. I think that when well managed, it can be a lot of fun. It allows for different dynamics to emerge. It is exciting oftentimes. I will say that letting it go on for far too long can be dreary, and in very large groups, it can be a pacing killer, because you have one group that's doing all sorts of exciting things and then three people are sitting there as spectators. You can balance this out, but doing so by making the rest of the group sit there and wait is not ideal. The game that I've seen most successfully split the party is one that has two players, including me, and that is very workable because we can take turns, and this is clean.
It's interesting when you say that splitting the party is something you're pro. My knee-jerk reaction, my instinct that I've honed over many years, I started playing back in 1983. My instincts scream at me like, don't do that, right? But I think you made an excellent point, and I think that players that grew up in the first and second edition era, like myself, probably lean too far away from splitting the party when it can be a really useful tool.
I'm in favor of anything that makes the game feel alive. Splitting the party is something that just would happen. Like, if it makes sense, yeah, you should do that. You then need to adjust the pace, though. I would say that, like, aside from really high stakes things, which unfortunately are often part of the case when you're splitting the party, it should be fast paced. It should be a rapid, even vignette style, to return the party to cohesion, let people have influence in things. Settings where the party is out of communication are harder to split as well. When you can at least be like on codec and involved in decisions, it's more satisfying to be not part of the immediate action. But I always veer toward whatever is most immersive, right? Whatever feels most true to the situation, which maybe is not always ideal, but it's my instinct.
I've got a suggestion for people who are interested in this topic and want to learn how to pace better. And this is going to sound weird, but I'm a cinephile. I love films. I love movies. I love the craft of filmmaking. And I think you can actually learn a lot about pacing by taking a movie you enjoy, and trying to break it down a little bit about like, where's the rising action, where's the falling action, where did they give the audience a chance to breathe, and where did they focus on, fast paced, really interesting stuff coming at you on screen. And it can be, I think, very instructive to dissect a film this way and look at it, and you can map a lot of things that happen in a film to things that happen in a game. Obviously, the medium is different. Obviously, you're going to have to adjust for it being more interactive and improv than a scripted event. But I do think it's valuable to study, to look at like where those changes in the flow occur and how they sandwich them in a film.
A really good example of splitting the party is Star Wars Episode 4, where the party split on the Death Star. The groups have influence on each other. They're in communication in ways that are exciting. What they're doing feels important and necessary. The reason they've split made sense. All of it is pro-narrative. All of it is kind of exciting. And they reconvene.
Shut down all the trash compactors on the detention sector. Shut them all down. Oh, curse my metal body. Listen to them, R2. They're dying.
It works great. It works great.
One of my favorite scenes.
When it hits because they split up, because there's that tension that it adds, it can work really well. Just you have to like understand why it's happening. I would say the best party split is one where it really makes sense narratively, which is kind of a perhaps superfluous thing to say, but you can split the party for like optimization. It feels best when it's like thematic. But you want to make the pace fast when that happens. You want to keep things moving along because, again, it's boring to sit there and watch a lot of the time, unless you're able to balance it out really evenly, like in a very small group.
Is there a game like a Let's Play or an action game like Critical Role or something like that you would suggest people would look at as a way to learn from pacing, or do you feel like that those are the medium that they use for those is just too advanced for a typical table?
Well, I would say you can learn from advanced things. I would never be scared of trying to learn from stuff that is well executed, wherever that comes from. I would say that like learning from film is a great idea. You don't have to limit yourself to actual play. Warhammer is pretty well paced. They do spin-off bonus episodes or things that would be difficult to cover at the table with effective pacing. There's a lot of separate like side journeys that happen through that. That's useful. Again, like the OG Star Wars film, super solid in this regard. There's a lot. There's a lot you can do.
Do you think it would be worthwhile to revisit our discussions of blue booking for maybe allocating that space in between sessions for actions that would otherwise slow things down at the table?
Yeah, like I think a useful tool in your GM's toolkit when you're doing pacing is saying, hey, actually, you're going to do that for homework. You're going to get back to me on this. It's okay to tell your player, listen, why don't you tell me later, but not now? Well, because again, in the example of the party where one player really wants to do city building, the rest really does not, you can just let them do that and do it on their own time and then come back with it, and then everyone's happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I wouldn't do it often, but I think you absolutely can consider that a tool in the toolbox to offload certain activities that would be detrimental to the pace of the campaign or the pace of the session, and instead offload that to in between session stuff.
Well, the worst pacing crusher, far worse than being in a conversation that's too slow for your meathead character or getting whipped through things that you would rather linger on, is spending an hour trying to figure out something mechanical.
Yeah.
And any chance you can do that later and get away with it, take it. Like, fuck it. If you have to figure it out right there, maybe you can do something, but it's that one's brutal. That one's brutal.
So what are some things where you would what are some things that would occur during a game that would cause you as a game master to say, okay, I'm going to slow the pace down actually, and we're going to focus on this, or we're going to allow for this to breathe. Because a lot of the conversations we've been having about this episode has been about how to keep the pace moving, as opposed to like when do you want to slow things down? When do you think you need to slow things down?
The short answer is whenever they're really juicy. Like if you've got a player who has trouble tapping into their character's personality, perhaps they're playing sort of a brigand or a brute, and they don't often spend time in character, and you see them really latching onto some idea, some NPC, you want to give that time to breathe. If there's a character interaction within the party that's exploring new facets of a character's relationship, you want to let that sit. You want to let them explore this. You don't want to cut directly through these. You want to let them simmer. You as the GM can use the as that happens tool to keep those conversations going, right? As you discuss with the lady the circumstances of this disappearance, you see on the wall a painting of her late brother, and the unit on his shield, the heraldry of it, it's your own.
Yeah. Now, I think I would say when it comes to pacing, though, that one of the hardest things to learn, and one of the most important things to learn, is when to just shut up and sit back and let the players go.
Saying nothing is a really effective way to interrogate people. By just like sitting there and nodding, you can prompt people to say more in a lot of cases. This is a funny psychological trick, but it works as a GM also. They'll fill the space, especially if they're on a roll. This is often an issue, but can be a wonderful blessing. So
yeah, I would say if you're a game master and you have these moments occur a lot, savor them, because that means you have a great group that is willing to just role play with each other at the drop of a hat. And I have a group like that. I think Vera may have a group like that. It's pretty amazing. It's honestly one of the best things when you as a game master can say, okay, I don't need to add anything here. I can just sit back and wait for them to naturally come to a conclusion in their little conversation about, whether or not to attack the troll, or whatever it is,
Yeah, the game comes to life in those moments, I think. And it's like, I would argue that kind of moment is part of the goal of everything else you do at the table, is letting the characters really come to life.
Yeah. And we did point this out earlier, but it's worth saying again that the purpose of pacing is not to fit some arbitrary judgment in your head. It's instead to maximize the fun. The goal is to everybody should have a good time. And pacing is a very, very, very important tool to reach that goal, but it is not the end all be all. If you have to choose between pacing and having fun, choose the having fun. Now, I'm gonna kind of, I know we're a little early, but I'm gonna go ahead and give like my final thoughts on pacing, because I've been going for a while, and, and I would love to hear your thoughts, but then also whatever else you want to discuss. But I think pacing is something you cannot master in a single session. It's something that you have to practice consciously as a game master, or as a player. But it is developed over time, over what watching your table, reading the room, iterating your approach, finding ways that work better with your group or work with this specific campaign. So don't expect to master it right away, but the foundations are pretty consistent. Try to alternate fast and slow scenes. Try to fill the session with meaningful choices. Try to respect the emotional energy of your players, and end on a note that makes them all want to come back and play again. So if the techniques that you're using serve those things, then great, awesome, fantastic. But it is something you'll need to practice, and you can get rusty. I have gone to a convention table and ran a game and be like, wow, I am not pacing this well. I need to figure it out, right? Because I was watching the clock. But the best diagnostic tool is actually the simplest one. After the session's over, just ask the players directly what felt good, what didn't felt good, what felt like it worked, what felt like it was too slow. Over time, having these kinds of conversations with your players will calibrate your instincts more precisely than anything else. It will give you a baseline to read off of. And if you have a particularly good session, if you're like, man, that was like my favorite D&D session of all time, what made it work? Break it down, think about it, and apply whatever you learn to your own stuff. That's what I have to say about pacing in terms of final thoughts.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Because D&D, because tabletop games, because whatever RPG you're invested in they're always social games. They will depend based on the day, based on the group, based on the nature of the session, and pacing is flexible. There is perhaps no best answer. It's a matter of finding the right path for your group, of finding like a harmonious solution, of trying to cater to everyone's needs, including the practical concerns of how to schedule things. The most rewarding approach to calibrating pacing, I believe, is to try and prioritize the feel of the game, however that manifests. It's something that evolves. It's the kind of thing where you might want to ask sometimes, hey, can we run for another hour? Right? Maybe you can't. Maybe you can. It's the kind of thing that does come with practice, the kind of thing that will depend on your group, on the night. Being sensitive to how your players are feeling will be advantageous. Being a good communicator will be. All of these things coupled together to find a good balance, a good avenue through the game with the ups and downs that going faster and slower can bring. And it's the kind of thing that's helpful to keep in mind, to keep in your heart, because it will determine a lot about how the game feels, what's memorable.
Mm-hmm. For me, it began just by trying to make sure everyone was having fun. And I started to read their reactions and see their levels of energy and see when they were engaged and when they weren't. And so for me, this has become kind of an instinctual thing. I don't really think about pacing that much anymore because I just kind of do it subconsciously. But just doing this episode, I've actually thought about it. And I feel like even for someone like myself who's been running a very long time and it has become instinctual, that doesn't mean I can't learn things from it. That doesn't mean I can't improve. And that's one of the things I love about like this show. So we do such a deep dive into something that I think I know really well. And then I'm at the end, I'm like, actually, maybe I've got room to grow here. So there's that.
Well, I think with any kind of art, you're never done growing, right? Even as a person, you're never done growing. There's always room to iterate on stuff, to learn new lessons. And that's part of the beauty of making things, of any creative activity, is there's like space always to hone your skills and to think about things more deeply and become even more of an expert, which you certainly are.
Well, I do see a comment here I think is great. The Exiled One says, when in doubt, send visions to the cleric that their god says, please don't do that thing. Yeah, if you need an NPC to speak to the player character, sometimes the cleric's deity or the warlock's patron can be an excellent resource.
The word of God says, please hit the brakes. Disaster.
I feel like that's something I struggle with, is like involving the warlock patron, and just thinking about it right now is like I could use the warlock patron more directly to influence things, and maybe I should be taking the role of the patron a little more seriously.
Well, I would say that like the patron's involvement directly kind of depends on the warlock themselves and their player, like how they feel about that in the abstract. You don't want to go too hard on it if they want the patron to be more mysterious, more abstract. But if they're down to have their patron meddle, that could be a great tool for both setting the pace and having corrective measures applied to the narrative and whatever else you need as a voice of God from the GM.
Right, and some patrons patrons have, like, same with deities or clerics, they have like this built-in sense of authority that can be abusive for the game master, because if the game master says, well, your cleric's god tells you to do X, I mean, that's direct, that's on the nose, right? That's going to feel like it's taking away some of my agency. But if
they're also going to do that, right? They're going to do that.
Almost certainly, yeah. So I think it's important to be careful when you are using such an authoritative NPC to try and guide the party, right? Either do it through a proxy, like it's a that's a lesser angel or a spirit or whatever might be more helpful than actually having the patron or the god be like, hey, do the thing or don't do the thing.
Yeah, having that kind of mouthpiece is useful, whether it's the patron or Mr. Ed or both.
We're gonna have to do this Mr. Ed thing, aren't we? Oh my god. That is so great. God damn. I love this show. I love the collaboration we get out of it.
It's a fun time. I think we tend to hone in on some useful stuff, and this is a useful topic because ideally pace sets itself, right? The perfect game is one where there is no interference. There's just things run perfectly, and they've got that Star Wars Episode 4 tempo to them, and they are natural. But in practice, you may need to apply a little bit of a delicate hand, whether it's as the player who's savvy to what's happening or as the GM who's desperate to not be out till 3 a.m, or some combination therein. And sometimes that hand can't be quite as delicate. Right?
You're reminding me of many of my my college era gaming when we were it's desperate to avoid the 3 a.m. That would be me. when it gets to like 1:30 in the morning, I'm gonna be like, let's shut this thing off, bro. I gotta get some sleep. I got some classes early.
Which might not have the best pacing. Like perhaps you have regrets about this. You're like, because it kind of sucks to cut off at some random time, right? It's preferable to have it feel like a satisfactory ending. That's part of the goal that pacing is, just to make the sessions feel nice, to make them flow into each other well, to make it feel like you haven't wasted your time during a game. And that is easier said than done. I guess like one closing thought is that ultimately there's worse things than a session that is awkward pacing. It's most important to prioritize just having fun in the moment. But it will aid that. It'll be easier to everybody have fun if the pacing is tight, if it's what it should be, if it slows down where it ought to and speeds up where it needs to.
I think I'll add that another way to learn about pacing it would be to go to a gaming convention where they do have those 4-hour slots and try out a few games, like 2 or 3, and just sort of not only enjoy yourself, like because you should, because it's a gaming convention, because that's what makes them fun, but also take a little moment to like, how is this guy handling pace? How does this adventure handle pace?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can walk away. I mean, ideally you walk away with some things you're like, oh, that worked out really well. But you might also walk away with like, hey, that didn't work. That definitely didn't work. I don't want to do that. So that could be instructive to play a convention game with some strangers and see how it goes.
Yeah, like you can learn a lot from that because you're, I guess part of it is you're less inclined in a game with strangers to be as concerned about like much except the pacing. You got a certain window to be in. Everybody's on the same page of things they want to do at the convention. These aren't your friends; they're your allies. So there's something to that. They might become friends, but you're motivated in slightly different ways. So there's a lot that goes into that.
That's true. I've run a lot of games at our local gaming con, Genghis Con. Which is really, it's excellent. It's one of my favorite gaming conventions of all time.
Great name.
It's really good. If you're at all able to get to the Colorado area, it's a really, really good gaming convention. But there's kind of a sense in the community of game masters at that convention there's a little bit of competition. There's a little bit of like, I want to be the guy that everyone signs up for early, right? So there's a little bit of pressure, not a lot, but there's a little bit of pressure from the community to produce really high quality convention gaming experiences. And I feel like that has influenced me greatly because when I run games there, I'm like, I want this to be good. I want it to be fun, even if it's people I don't know. And so one of the things I can control without knowing who's going to show up to the table is I can control the pacing. And that's why I felt that was a very important tool that I learned quickly over my years of gaming.
Yeah, it's because if you're practiced in honing the game to work well when you have no idea who's going to be there, then with your friends who you're going to be able to read better, to predict the course of action of, it's going to be excellent, right?
Well, let's face it, even if you do have a group of your friends that you've gamed with for many, many, many years, they're still going to come up with shit you did not prepare for.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think I think one of the most worthwhile pieces of advice we can give is to focus on the stuff you can control and you can predict. which is not always what the players are going to do. And in fact, very rarely what the players are going to do is something you can predict for. But you can decide whether you want to lean into it or whether you want to move on from it. And
how's the Serenity prayer go? Like the serenity to accept the things that cannot change.
Right, and the strength to endure. Right, yeah. Those are that's an interesting viewpoint on it. Are there any game mechanics that come to mind that you would? I mean, obviously we talked about the hacking in Shadowrun, for example, but are there any game mechanics that can positively or negatively affect the game's pace?
Shopping. Anything in the economy, buying stuff, requisitions, purchases, nightmare. It's always a bit of a slog. The only exception is when they're like talking to NPCs as part of this. There's like some kind of setup there, but the raw mechanical stuff, it's like flipping through books, it's rolling dice for the sake of getting discounts. It feels rough sometimes, and ways to make it feel less like a slog just add to the time it takes a lot of the times. It's a thing that can be done between sessions or in the abstract, I would say, to make things more smooth. That's my preference.
Famously, in campaign 1 of Critical Role, Travis just hates shopping. He's like, "Oh God, please, no more shopping," because to him, I mean, it certainly seemed like it was something that slowed things down and disengaged him. But shopping is, I think, a very, very common thing that occurs, and there are ways to make it more interesting. Obviously, having interesting NPCs to speak to is probably the first one. But you could, I mean, that's shopping is something you can certainly offload for the in-between sessions. Like, come back to me next session with what you bought and how much you spent.
So my issue with adding interesting NPCs as a solve is that now you are in the forbidden realm of the shopping session, where the entire session is going to be meeting and tripping shopkeepers and such. So it better be well structured, because that's what you're doing. That is your job now. You're doing this.
I would never tell somebody to not role play shopping, because you can have like some really breakout NPCs that you encounter during a shopping trip. There's you could get your pocket picked. Honestly, you could probably do a whole book about things to give your party to do while they're shopping.
I would say that elegance is the most important factor here, which is kind of an abstract thing to say, but ultimately, no, it's true, because if you can tie that into the broader narrative, it's going to feel a lot better than like, here's our scrungly shopkeep of the day. It's the more times you do it, the less you can rely on having like just interesting one-off characters, right?
I was just laughing because when you said elegance, all that came to mind was that schoolmaster from Spy Family, that everything's got to be elegance. I don't know if you see that, but
that's me, Ross. That's me. I'm running the private school here.
Elegance is the most important bit. No, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, you just never know. Some people. Now I actually want to. I want to write the talking horse that is the son of a centaur and a minotaur, and B, I want to write a small supplement of like while your players are shopping, here are ways to keep everyone engaged and interested.
Well, step 1 is making the shopkeeper a talking horse.
Well, I mean, you can have first thing comes to my mind is you can have an encounter with a shoplifter or a pickpocket. You can have you can have weird visions from your deity or your warlock patron. You can have your familiar, go nuts because the shopkeeper's got a guard dog. Something along those lines would be just like a little, I don't know, random table of encounters for something interesting. Because you're right, it can bog down into, okay, you see the weapon seller, what do you want? Okay, you spend the money. Or you get a discount. Like that's the only real meaningful thing that's going to happen, right?
Right.
So.
You want it to feel like it's relevant and intriguing and varied. It's a tough one because it's literally doing chores, right? But because it's so important, it's something you kind of have to play out or have to address, because it's the chore that makes your character stronger in a lot of cases. It is an interesting subject. It's something that I often dread because I
You're
tend
not
to play
alone.
characters who have limited interest in shopping in the first place for various reasons. They're like weirdos who don't want to buy anything.
You're not alone. I also dread it. I also am like, oh God, shopping, here we go. But there are also times where I'm really tempted to just, go full chaos and dive in and be like, okay, here's my weirdest NPC as the shopkeep.
I can make it work. Yeah, no, because like when it creates an end to further adventures, or it ties into the narrative, or highlights useful things about the characters, then it's winning. It's doing something that like works on multiple levels, which I would say is ideal. Like that's what I mean by elegance, is that it serves a few purposes. It has the opportunity to engage beyond like how much of a discount can I get on this, right? Which is reductive, although essential.
I have a shopkeeper that is based on Charlie Sheen. He does have tiger blood, and he will tell you about how he's winning.
I would buy all sorts of consumable items from him. I trust that guy.
Right. Here's one from Volcano who says, my favorite shopkeeper was a skeleton pushing a broken cart that sold magic goods from previous parties that had played at the table. Oh, that is good. That's quite good. All right. Well, 5 minutes left, Vera. What else would you like to talk about?
What else tends to crash the pacing of the game other than shopping? I guess like splitting the party, shopping does.
Letting unchecked planning just continue until everyone
Waffling, yes.
waffling in circle. Constant cliffhanger endings. Either a game that's all combat or all role playing, although again, those can be very good. It just depends.
Distraction. One thing that's brutal is needing to recap for somebody who just was not paying attention a lot of times. This is the consequence of that is pacing, because it sucks all of the energy out to have to like tell the same fucking guy what just happened 6 times in a row, right? It's disrespectful because it makes the game brutally slow down.
That's a player problem for sure. Yeah.
Yes, but it can happen. Combat itself can be a pacing issue. You do address these things to consider them and try and tailor to them in the moment. This is a great thing to like check in with your players about too, because part of the beauty of like having roundtable discussion is you can talk about, is the game feeling well paced, right? What feels like it's too slow, too fast.
Right. And I think your point that you made earlier was, I think, one of the most difficult to learn is like, what's trivial? What can we jettison or refocus, away from to keep the pacing going? Because trivial things often are, they can be a roadblock. I tend to lean into it on occasion. Like if my player characters are going to go to a big party, I might take half an hour and say, okay, so what clothing are you wearing? Like, please describe to me this awesome new set of clothes that you're putting on.
That's thematic though. What you might not do is say, okay, describe how you sign up the carriage to take you to the party.
Right. We're not going to role play out the scene where you go and find the carriage and rent it.
Well, you got to go shopping there, and you're talking to the storekeeper, right? And then you go and look at the horses, and one of them starts talking. He's like, "Hey there, adventurers! You should have me take you to the party."
Wilbur. God damn
it! So all of that matters. I would say that the prior should just be on whatever is thematic, whatever is evocative, and whatever feels right. Like you'll get a sense what your party's intrigued by. You can get a sense of what you might make intriguing. All of this works.
Well, that is about it for this particular episode. We will have our season finale next Monday, where we discuss Total Party Kill, also called the TPK.
Yeah, to be followed not long after with a couple of other exciting episodes. Just start off season 2. It's going to be exciting times. We got a couple cool guests lined up.
Oh yes.
Our first ever actual play one shot of the worst game we can find.
The worst game we're willing to play. Because I would not be willing to play Fatal.
What a sensible thing. Wow.
Where can people find you on the internet if they are looking for you?
I am very similar on all platforms. I'm playing the beta of Dark Heresy tomorrow. I'm assuming you're gonna be playing that soonish yourself. Gonna be doing some exciting stuff over there. I've got high hopes there, doing some cool 3D things in the near future, releasing a supercut of an absurd stream I did before too long. So just like slash verisimila everywhere, like verisimilitude, but not.
Not with a tude.
How about you, Ross?
You're
Let's do it
also
exciting.
You're also part of Lorebeards book club.
Yes. And this Sunday we're going to be covering our next book. So please check out the Discord. Get informed. We will continue soon. Book club is resuming.
And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into role-playing games, I'm also a host over at Lorebeards 40K, which records every Wednesday and Saturday. You can find me on Twitch. I am twitch.tv/the_Ross_Watson. And I am playing Final Liberation currently, one of the Warhammer classics.
Very nice.
That's about all. So like and subscribe, help the algorithm reach more minds with our craziness about role-playing games. And we'll see you next Monday, I guess.
Thanks, y'all. Bye now.
Cheers.